Simmons. He's doing a great job where he is. Why do you want him?
Why do you people always question why? Ask why. When how is so much more fun.
The following contains strong language, violence, and nudity. It is intended only for mature audiences. Discretion advised.
This is the thing that I desperately need now. I desperately need us to do some Spawn shit because we have not done an episode since January. We barely put out any episodes the whole year prior. We used to be one of several Image Comics related podcasts out, but to celebrate the anniversary, most of us have all pod faded. I think Savage Fincast is about the only thing that's still going right now. Besides being the 30th anniversary of Image, it's also therefore the 30th anniversary of the Spawn character, and also, since Spawn got his movie 5 years after being created, the 25th anniversary of the motion picture. So there's a lot of shit that we would ideally cover this year with very, very little time. Plus, because of my frustration at getting the show out, which is both of us, you've had personal stuff going on that's put you out of commission for long periods of time. Because I felt a lot of pressure to try to cover a lot more material than we used to, where we just do a single issue or a mini series. So I've gotten overwhelmed with all the reading and researching and found audio interviews and shit, and just basically crushed myself as well. And it's like, there's been times where it's like, do we even need to continue doing the Spawnometer? It's like, do we have the passion? Do we have the constitution to keep this up? If nothing else, I've got so much backlogs material recorded with you, recorded with other people, that at the very least I have to burn off that shit. So if all of a sudden, folks, if you're listening, if all of a sudden I start having years old material and a bunch of people didn't even remember recording with me doing stuff, then you know that I'm probably going to end the damn show. But I'm going to try not to. We're going to try to get you some stuff out.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to do several issues of Spawn in a row in one recording session, so that I have more flexibility as far as when we get stuff out without having to wait for both of us to be ready at the same time to put out a new episode.
Okay.
So Spawn number 34 was released on August the 17th, 1995. This was the same month as Green Arrow number 101, where they killed off Ollie Queen for a few years. This was Steve Rogers' Captain America number 444 and Thor number 491, so around the same time that they were relaunching the pre-Heroes Reborn stuff, where they had Mark Waid and Ron Garney on Cap. They had Warren Ellis and Mike Deodato Jr. on Thor, so trying to revitalize those characters. You had Shadow Man number 43, the last issue of that series, so the first series and one of the longest running series of the Valiant era is done now. We've got Jim Valentino's The Alliance number 1, which was abandoned after 3 issues, unfortunately, and it's curious because that was supposed to be like a launch title for Image. He went with Shadowhawk instead, and now a few years later he can't even get more than 3 issues out of the concept. We had Ballistic number 1, which featured the Cyberforce character, but what's more important is that this is one of the broader introductions for Michael Turner to comic book audiences. Obviously, Witchblade number 1 would be an even bigger introduction, but this is sort of where he was getting to a place where they would offer him his own series. Chapel number 1, the ongoing series, quote unquote, which ran 7 issues before Rob Liefeld split. Pit number 9 came out this month, which is, I believe, the last Image Comics issue of that series. Stormwatch number 25, which I think was the only Images of Tomorrow book to actually reach issue 25 and beyond. We've got the debut of Kurt Busiek's Astro City number 1, so I think something of a turning point for Image Comics, where they were still doing superheroes, but they were doing more the mature version of more mainstream type stuff, sort of like the Vertigo of superhero comics, which Wildstorm especially would be heavily into. You had the New Prophet number 1 with the Stephen Platt artwork. I think that had a chromium cover. Over at Marvel, you had Exiles versus X-Men, Avengers Ultra Force, Cyberforce She, Darkseid versus Galactus, Nightman versus Wolverine, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles beat Savage Dragon, Spider-Man and Batman, Batman versus Predator 2, Lobo Judge Dredd. This was like the golden era of intercompany crossovers. Like, we'll probably never be seen again because, especially when it comes to Marvel and DC, these guys are giant corporations now. They're not going to be hanging out with each other anymore.
Yeah.
Spawn number 34, the story is called Ripples. It's by Todd McFarlane and Greg Capullo, dedicated to Sal Buscema. I know you know who he is.
Yep.
Do you want to elaborate?
An amazing, incredible Hulk artist. Probably one of my favorite, next to Todd McFarlane and Purvey. I mean, he did the essential Hulk, the look. I actually own some of his artwork, too.
Was that some of the later stuff that Gary Talia Alioc inked, or was this something else?
Oh, you're gonna frank me now. I have no idea, dude. I just know.
Okay, what period is it from? Is it drawing the Hulk?
Yeah, he's drawing the Hulk and he's fighting Nightmare. That's the one that I hate, that someone had taken off the word balloons. You could see the word balloons were actually put on the artwork, and whoever had it previously before me took off the word balloons.
And so you got all that sticky brown gunk left over.
Yeah, so it kind of throws it off. I always assumed that they drew in the word bubbles, the word balloons, and then, the letterer would go in and do them. I didn't realize, no. They actually just the artist would draw, and I guess the letterer would make the balloons and then just glue them on top.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with Paquita, is she didn't know about that either. And so I was explaining how it's a lost art because everything's done digitally now, and it's way easier to fix something or to just make it to where you don't really notice it's not as good as it used to be. Where in the old days, you had these calligraphers, these craftsmen who had to figure out how to fit all those letters in that space by hand, no reproduction, and do the balloons and figure out the placement of the artwork that'd be perfect without obscuring stuff, and so your eye would naturally follow. And certainly, you probably come across this as well. I have a harder time reading modern comics because they're not as good as at the balloon placement, and so I don't necessarily know where to follow the dialogue on a given page anymore because you don't have those letters anymore.
I can see that. I mean, it's definitely a lost art in terms of like the style. Because even like the old stuff, there was, whenever it was an internal thought, it was kind of cloudy. When they're speaking, it was a very, a spoken balloon.
Yeah, the old word balloons, the thought balloons.
Yeah. So,
I miss those. I mean, everything's a caption now. It's so rigid.
So go ahead.
Okay, so what did you think of the cover to this issue?
What's the cover look like?
This is the one with the clown doing another head puppet, basically, although it's not stuck on his hand like it was during the miniseries. He's got his fingers through the eye holes and a thumb through the mouth hole, and it's just sort of dangling there like he wears Leatherface or something. He's wearing a no spawn button. He's in the sewers, and he's brandishing a big bloody knife.
Was this the time when they started doing like multiple covers?
No, Spawn did single covers for a long time, much longer than most of the places. So this is the only cover they had, is the clown one.
Okay, because I always remember, but didn't he always do like special covers or special? He did, didn't he?
Not really. He was really good. He was one of the best people about not doing a billion covers. Now he does a billion covers all the time, but he was one of the real holdouts on that front.
I don't know.
I don't think he did a Spawn variant cover until like 50, and even then I think it was just a foil variant or something.
Okay, so
now when Fan did their fan editions for, I think, Hero Illustrated magazine, those had variant covers, but that was kind of a Hero Illustrated thing, not a Todd McFarlane Productions thing.
Okay, because I just always I want to say I remember going to your shop and sometimes seeing like two different covers on the table.
Well, sometimes they'd also ship multiple issues because they were so far behind and were playing catch up, so that might have been it too.
Okay, well, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, it used to be cute when our show was late all the time because it was sort of like Image Comics was late all the time. But now we're into like Dale Keown Pitt levels or really Will Sportasio Wetworks levels of lateness.
Well, see, we're keeping the image style alive. We're translating it to podcast form.
So what did you think of the cover, though? You don't remember it that well?
No, I don't remember it that well.
Yeah, I have to say that especially, it was already a problem when McFarlane was doing the covers himself, but Capullo is pretty repetitive with his cover imagery. This one was more involved than most because it's still in the early days, and it's the first, I think, Violator Spotlight cover that he's done, but it does get to be road after a while, just like the samey kind of stuff. But I like this one okay for what it is, but it's still essentially a pinup more than it is a cover.
Yeah.
So what happens in this issue?
Don't remember. Dude, I read these a while back.
Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of help on this, although my notes are old too, so I'm not going to be the best person for this either.
Because I remember you were like, we need to record, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to read. I was like, I'm going to be cool. I'm going to read ahead, just so when you were like, hey, we need to read it, I'll be like, done. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, just as a frame of reference, the document I'm reading from now was created January 29th of this year, and it was last modified September 5th, and we're recording on the 10th. So it's been almost a year since I've looked at this stuff. So
this is going to be interesting.
This will help us to keep it short. So, quote unquote, Spawn, Warden, Violator. I don't know if that's from the comic or it's just my note editorializing. He's saved from drowning after a fight with Spawn by some shirtless freak, which we're going to elaborate on later on.
Okay, I remember that. Yeah, okay, I remember. Okay, I'm starting to vaguely remember this one. That's right. That's when Freak shows up.
Yeah, and then despite having just had a stupid slugfest with Spawn, he's encouraging himself and other agents to strike at a distance. Fuck with him, but fuck with him from further away. away because he's more powerful than they expected he should have been at this point in his career. You've got Grandma Blake being visited by Wanda, and they're talking about the Children's Society that I think that Wanda's working for at that particular point in time because she's like a professional philanthropist or some shit. Do you remember the kid Tyrone? He's a little black kid. Apparently they're trying to force him to become a drug dealer.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think I remember this one.
So what happened with that?
Isn't that the one where someone gets killed? You gotta admit, the chick in the mud bath wrestling.
Right, and let's not jump quite that far ahead. We got to go back to the urban cesspool, basically Times Square in 1977.
So it shows here, hey boy, what? Yeah, so that's where they're trying to get him to be a drug dealer, and Spawn sees it. It pisses him off because he's all.
I will say that while these are not my kind of gals in the Daisy Dukes and stuff, I have to say that Capullo is better with the cheesecake than McFarlane is. I don't think McFarlane did that many like quote unquote hot babes. With Capullo, he's got some atypical body types here at times, and they still look attractive. So he's a little bit stronger in that regard.
He does enjoy the ass, apparently. There's a lot of ass shots. Is that the Violator that kills those dudes in there?
Okay, so what happens is this bald guy named Stinky appears to be trying to force this 10-year-old boy named Tyrone to deal for him. Spawn gets wind of this and follows Stinky into a mud pit. He's basically watching through peepholes, girls doing like mud wrestling. Which is sort of one thing I gotta give Todd McFarlane credit for is I'm pretty sure he's not a pervert because he can't even get the perversions right. Is like there's peepholes where girls do stuff to themselves and you can only see through the hole. And there was mud wrestling, which people will usually have crowds of, even topless mud wrestling. When you're combining the peepholes and the mud wrestling, you probably don't know what you're talking about.
It seems a little PG-13.
Yeah. Stinky's watching the girls in the mud pit, and then Spawn comes for him and just demolishes him to such a degree that blood is splitting out of the glory holes, I guess. And the girls are like, I'm used to the blood and the titties, but not the fucking, I'm used to the girl's blood maybe, but I'm not used to the hemorrhaging blood from out of the high holes. And so they're a little freaked out by that.
So is that why Malebolgia has like a boner?
Yeah, because again, I've recently watched the movie, and we've not so long ago watched the cartoon series, and they're all about telling you about how, we're going to just get Spawn to where he's just such a fucking maniac. He's killing everybody like Freddy Krueger, and then he'll be a general in our army. He won't worry about Wanda and all the other bullshit anymore because he'll be so fucked up that he'll be a great evil guy. And so we get a whole page of Malebolgia going, ha ha ha, him being a dumbass and killing people is exactly what we want to do. Keep it up.
So I guess now reading this, the whole concept of Spawn on Malebolgia's part was to make him almost like a serial killer?
They wanted to make him a completely remorseless killer and lead Hell's armies, essentially, yeah. So the whole thing with them continually fucking with Wanda and Terry and Cyan and shit is just to break him enough to where he no longer has any morals whatsoever, and he'll just do what they want him to do. He'll just be a total mad dog killer for the armies of hell.
Okay, because I got an idea here, Spawn. I got an idea here, Todd. You do Spawn versions of like serial killers of history, because that sounds pretty much like that's what the whole. I mean, they like when Spawn goes around killing people. He's kind of one of those. He can only kill bad guys. He can't kill a good guy. He's not going to harm. Well,
that's the whole point. Is they want to get him to a degree where he's so over humanity that he can kill whoever they want him to kill and do whatever they want him to do. Where he just doesn't give a shit anymore, basically.
Okay.
They're trying to get him to the fuck the world place.
I don't know. It just feels weird because like he's already. Okay. So, and I know I'm trading backwards a little bit here. We've discussed that he's basically an ectoplasmic suit, right? That doesn't breathe, that doesn't eat, that doesn't shit, doesn't sleep. He's just a walking bag of ectoplasm that imagines itself as a human person, as a human being. So is it his soul that drives this bag of ectoplasm, or I don't know.
I have to assume that the soul is a key here. If the physical form doesn't have any relevance to the point where he's not even in his actual human mortal body, it has to come down to the soul and the necroplasm and the suit itself.
So almost okay, because I feel almost like the soul would be like the driving engine. I guess. I mean, I've tried to imagine what is. I know what Malebolgia's end game is. Turn him into a general of hell, and the only way to do that is to make him a killer. They liked him off the bat because he was a badass soldier. Kind of shocked that they didn't take Chapel over him because Chapel was already fucking just fucked.
Chapel was definitely the correct choice. So I'm not sure what motivated that either. He's absolutely who they needed Spawn to be already. And I'm sorry, but as far as I can tell, Chapel's a lot smarter than Al Simmons. So that's a whole other thing too. It's like, maybe he would be too clever. Maybe that he would be too willful and too difficult to manipulate. I think that the one thing with Al Simmons, and they emphasize this in the movie, is that he's such a perfect soldier. He does what he's told. And it's not a problem until he finally says no. I don't think that the Chapel necessarily ever reaches that point, but I do think he reached the point where it's like, why aren't either one giving the orders? So I think that perhaps giving Bruce Stinson that level of power would have been a threat to guys like Violator and Malebolgia, where it was clear that Al was never going to be at a place where he was going to challenge them, or it didn't appear that way when they started this deal.
Do you think almost like maybe Malebolgia was scared that?
I think he was scared of Chapel. And if we ever get back to the Extreme Sacrifice crossover, we'll address that, because we're still at the place where Chapel killed himself because he's dying from HIV anyway, and because having seen what Al Simmons was able to accomplish by dying, he's going to try to take a similar path, but take it to another level.
That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. It's just that we're that's like a 10-part crossover, and there's all this other shit that we got to cover. So it's been on pause. Yeah, but I want to read that too.
Okay, so let's go. So he kills Stinky.
No, he doesn't. Yeah, he kills Stinky. That's right. Yeah,
he definitely kills him. There is no way Stinky walked away because Malebolgia's just beating off to it. Next thing we see is Jason Wynn. Well, we see that.
But don't forget, it's kind of important. We have the talking heads again. Hate to keep harping on the movie, but they do have a female reporter in that movie, and I'm not sure if she's supposed to be the same character, although she certainly seems to be. But she's not Asian, but she has a similar haircut, and they do give that character a name in the movie that is not the same as some of the times I've seen it used in the comic book. So I'm not sure we can use that like the same way that Jessica Priest is in that movie as well. I'm not sure how much of that is apocryphal, but there is a female reporter that's named. But anyway, the three talking heads with their gigantic bricks of text that is a total labor to get through every single time. They're talking about
I never read it.
Yeah, they're talking about the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was not something that I was paying a lot of attention to in the 90s, but I was aware of to some degree. So it was a big enough event where I'm wondering, like, if anybody even remembers that shit anymore. It seems like that's been completely forgotten by history, all that kind of shit. But it's a key matter in this issue because Jason Wynn has interests there, and more importantly, actually it's not Jason Wynn, it's Bill Clinton. They don't call him by name, but it's clear it's Bill Clinton. He has an embarrassing diplomatic loggerhead with Milosevic, I guess it was, and so they need help to make Bill Clinton look good at this point, and that's why Violator is showing up to talk with Wynn. And I didn't remember because I'm so familiar with him doing this in the cartoon and the comics, but as far as I know, in the cartoon and the movie, but I think this might be the first time they're meeting the comic books, if I'm not mistaken.
No, yeah, because he met on the road.
And so Clown shows up explaining to Wynn how badly he's fucked at this particular point in time and how tenuous his hold on power still is. And he starts dictating to him, look, I'm going to help you with this Bosnia thing, but you're going to help me out. And for starters, instead of fighting Terry Fitzgerald, you're going to bring him closer into the family. You're going to have more control over him. And also you're going to, in insidious ways, start fucking with the expanded Spawn family.
I can see that. It's supposed to be like a two-pronged attack on Spawn, correct?
But again, he's learned that he's not doing too great with the direct attack, so he's now striking from a distance.
He's using Jason as one way to get to him through Terry and Wanda, and then I guess what Freak and them, he's going to kind of go at him in a different direction. But please continue.
Well, actually, you can probably pick it up from here. Who's the redhead?
So the redhead, isn't that Twitch's wife?
Helen Williams, that's correct.
And then, so Bert goes walking by her, and he's like, "Ooh, who's that?" And then it turns out Twitch was in the room, and he freaks out because that's his wife, and she's all lovey-dovey with him. And of course, Bert can't believe that. Twitch is kind of geeky, mousy kind of guy. Then, of course, we're shown Jason Wynn was talking to Clown. Todd pops up. I guess you would say he's chastising Spawn for killing Stinky.
Cogliostro is basically pointing out that, hey, dumb ass, you're doing exactly what hell wants you to do. And by the way, and this is terrible, but apparently using the vernacular of the 90s, this Tyrone kid is actually a super predator. He's actually the kingpin of this particular area. He was trying to muscle Stinky, and Stinky was just coming back on him. You didn't actually help things. You actually created a vacuum, and you're going to cause more violence and more chaos, and terrible things are going to happen to more people because you went off into this half-cock without realizing that you were helping the bad guy, essentially. You help the worst guy against a lower-level bad guy.
What a twist.
Par for the course, because fucking Spawn, right?
Yeah, I forgot about that term, super predator. That's his twin, right?
It came up a fair amount during the Biden campaign. Those of us who weren't entirely on board with Biden in the early days were pointing out that he had a lot of bad policy over these many decades as a politician. And that was, I don't know that he ever used that term, but it was popularized and associated with him.
Okay. I vaguely remember like Clinton saying that. I remember that.
And so the episode ends at something that's going to become very familiar. The Spawnometer is at 6887 because Al is much better apparently at conserving his power. It's going to stay at 6887 for a long time.
Okay.
So to the degree that you remember this issue from when you read it at some point in the last 2 years, did you enjoy it?
Again, Todd seems to have a lot of filling issues. I feel that way. Hey, dummy, these are the threads we're going to be following. I guess it's kind of his what a twist where Todd's trying to tell him, look, everything you see is not what it seems. Like, you know, you thought you were just killing a bad guy, and actually the bad guy was the kid, and you helped the kid.
To the degree that I remember the issue, I thought it was fine. It was definitely one of the less bad issues. But that's the furthest I'm willing to give it right now.
Well, it's all right. It was fine. I feel at this time Todd still didn't have his bearing of where he was going with his book. Well, I mean, I guess he did.
Dude, I finally gave up on reading the book because I've been reading it monthly for a while, and I think that 320 some odd issues later, I still don't feel like he's got his bearing on the fucking book.
Really?
Yeah. My favorite stuff was when somebody else was writing it.
I was going to say, I always liked when other people, like, you know...
Alan Moore or... what's the...
Gaiman.
Yeah, please, yes.
Brought in Angela. Yeah, I mean, when other... You're right. I agree. That's the thing is, I don't want to shit on Tom.
Well, have you, like, recently he had an interview where they were talking about how he writes a story, and apparently his process is that he tells the artist a handful of things that he wants them to draw, and then he tells them, just do whatever you want to do, and I'll rearrange the pages how I like, and I'll write a story over that. So it's not even Marvel method, it's not even Stan Lee, it's literally like taking a handful of pinup shots and then some connective material, and then he figures out what the story is on the back end.
Yeah. And he wants to direct the movie.
And he wants to direct a fucking movie, and it will off of his script. Yeah.
Oh, WildStar. Is this a fucking Larsen-verse character? This looks like a Larsen-esque costume with the hair sticking out of the top and everything. Like, shit, was he one of the fucking random guys in a Savage Dragon comic book in the first, 100 issues that I barely remember?
No, he was co-created by Al Gordon and Jerry Ordway and written primarily by Al Gordon.
Hey, who's this Alan Gordon? Do I know Alan Gordon?
I remember being a little kid and buying Dennis the Menace, and then the comic that I really got into when I was like 7 or 8 was like Space Mouse, I think was his name. He had like a purple costume on and he was like an outer space mouse. And when I was reading it, it was in gold key, and then slipped over into Betty and Veronica. I remember buying DC Comics before the Marvels really hit because I'm old. I was born in 1953. I mean, even as a little kid, I had good taste. I wasn't buying the Bob Kane Batmans that weren't drawn by Bob Kane. I was buying the Bob Kane detective comics that were drawn by Carmen Infantino, which I thought were really cool. I grew up with Steve Leialoha. I don't know if you guys know Steve. He worked on Fables, and Steve's like 2 years older than me, and we were like collecting comics since we were little kids. And he's still 2 years.
Coyote was one of the stuff.
With Steve Englehart, also a good friend of mine, and we're all like really within like a stone's throw of each other. Steve's just down Market Street. Eric's over by Golden Gate Park. Erik Larsen, and you'd have to have a really good arm. You'd have to throw across the bay to get to Steve Englehart, but we're all in the same general area. But yeah, I remember buying the DC stuff and thinking it was really cool. And probably one of the reasons I wanted to be into science, so I wanted to be a marine biologist, was because of like flash facts. And then whatever the page was in Green Lantern that was about light science, and I just thought that was cool. And I was a big fan of Gil Kane, Carmen Infantino, Kurt Swan early on. Was not a big fan of like Mike Sekowsky. I always bought the Justice League and was really disappointed when I got it home. It was like the covers looked great and the inside was kind of bizarre, kind of looked like Jack Kirby on acid. After I found the FF #9 and then Spider-Man #3, I remember buying it off the spinner rack and I was too short to reach the top. And that was it, man. So I was a huge Kirby and Ditko fan, and I was a big Legion fan when Kurt Swan was doing it. Just had a lifelong love of comics, even though I'd sold most of mine when I turned 16 and decided I liked girls better. And I wish I had the comics because girls have turned out to be a pain in the ass. But I was playing like 4 nights a week in a band. I was playing guitar and keyboards and singing. I was going to school, and I was working for the post office. I'd passed the test and was doing that. Suffice it to say, pretty busy all the time. Leialoha had just gotten his gig doing Warlock, and there was a couple instances where he said, "You want to come over and fill in blacks for me? I got this got to be in the mail tomorrow morning." And I was like, "Sure." So go over and start hanging with Steve from like 4 in the afternoon till like 4 in the afternoon the next day, and filling in blacks with a laundry marker and getting so stoned on it. There was one point where we were filling in blacks, and I was filling in blacks, and then we realized after I'd filled in about 4 pages that he couldn't do star fields. When you filled in the blacks with a Sharpie, the white paint you would use, whatever kind of white I would use, would turn orange. So that didn't quite work. So we found other ways to do it. But I remember for hours sitting there working with a Sharpie. And at one point I almost puked on, Steve's folks' rug. But that was basically it. I started helping Steve. Steve got a Spider-Woman gig over Carmine. They wanted him to do the book, but he said, I'll do this issue, which number 7. He asked me if I wanted to help him out, and I was like, fuck yeah, that'd be great. And so we split the pages up, and we were trying to ink random parts of each page so that you couldn't say this page was by me, this page was by Steve. It was a blast. And I mean, don't tell Steve I said this, but I grew up with Steve, and Steve is one of the most talented guys I've ever known. I mean, he is, if you haven't seen his sketchbook is like this weird cross between a Rick Griffin Fillmore poster, who I mentioned before, and Mobius and Jean Giraud and Bilal. His sketchbook is, Steve's got an insane sense of design, and he does this stuff where he scribbles something like a hand or an ice cream cone or a lamp on one of his sketchbooks, and then he turns it into a picture. It's like found art. Like he takes the first drawing that he did and he makes it evolve into something that is so perfectly composed. It's truly amazing. He's got a wonderful eye for composition, and he draws amazing. He drew better than anybody I know as a kid. He's really a great inker, and he's just a crazy guy. He plays bass really well too. We used to go to Fillmore shows and hang out with like the Jefferson Airplane after the show, and Steve would gravitate towards Jack Cassidy from the Jefferson Airplane, and they would stand there and talk, and we would hang out. That was back when you could hang out with Grace Slick. They were all pretty cool. But yeah, so Steve basically got me in. Whoever was the editor, it may have been Mark at that point, or it may have been Archie who called, but said, do you want to ink Carmine? And both of us were huge Carmine fans. And he said, I've got this other gig. I'm going to be doing Howard the Duck. So maybe Al would like it. And they said, oh, okay. Like a bunch of idiots. They went, oh, sure. And so they called me and said, do you want to do this? And I was like, oh my God, I'm not good enough to do this. I didn't say that to them. And I said, oh, sure. Piece of cake. So they sent me issue 9. So keep in mind, Steve and I did issue 7. They sent me issue 9. I inked one page and they called me and they said, we just found issue 8 in a drawer. It had never been sent to an inker. Do you want to do that? I inked Spider-Woman for a year and a half or something like that, from issue 7 to issue 14, or maybe just, I can't remember. But I was awful. Honestly, I never had a month to ink a book, because once they found issue 8 and I was foolish enough to say, sure, piece of cake, I was on like a 2.5 week to 3 week deadline, which is a lot to ink anybody, but or not a lot. It's a real short time to ink anybody, because I do about a page a day. Working on Carmine was twice as difficult. In fact, it was funny at the time. I'm not sure of the politics, but Carmine had stopped working for DC as their publisher. He started doing a lot of pencil work, and he did these incredible creepy stories that were inked by like Walt Simonson and, good Lord, Alex Nino, and just some of the most beautiful stuff I'd ever seen. And so I thought inking Spider-Woman was going to be like that, but Carmine puts so many lines down on the page, you have to figure out which line is going to look the best. If you've ever seen How I Draw the Flash by Carmine Infantino and the Flash Annual, that's how he draws. It's just a bunch of sketchy, crazy stuff. I was not ready for it at all, not even remotely. And I destroyed at least 8 issues of Spider-Woman inking Carmine. And I'm surprised that Marvel didn't realize how bad I was. I think they finally did after about a year. They were like, this guy sucks. I don't think I'd ever taken an art class in my life. In fact, Steve's studying art in college while I was studying music in college. But it's kind of equal. It's interesting. Steve's as good or better a bass player as I'm a designer, illustrator, inker, or whatever. And I'm probably as good at a musician as Steve is a penciler, inker. Those were both of our lusts in life. Steve ended up doing the art thing, and I ended up being more musical and then working in comics, which was very bizarre. They finally stopped sending me work for Marvel. They finally wised up. I'd been woodshedding to figure out how to ink, because I'd obviously destroyed, as I said, Carmine. Just that stuff's embarrassing. It's funny, John, my good buddy John Workman, who's one of my 2 favorite inkers who ever lived, him and Tom Orzechowski. But John said, man, I don't know why you're putting yourself down. I liked your inking over Carmine. And it's like, your taste is now in question for the rest of our relationship. I was called by Mark Evanier. He asked if I wanted to ink a Mike Sikowski story that he was writing called Radar. And he was working for Richard Howell on Adventure Illustrated. And I said, sure, wondering why Mark would call me on that. And he probably couldn't get anybody else to ink Mike. I got the pages in the mail, and they were the same kind of art as Carmine. They were just side of the pencil, kind of like you drew the pages with like a 4B and then rubbed it a dirty sock all over it. So you couldn't see what was going on. There was a million lines for everything, but it was kind of cool. I thought it was kind of neat. So I started studying all the contemporary guys that I thought were pretty awesome, and Terry Austin being one of them. I just woodshed, and I inked that issue. It probably took me 2 months to ink that issue, and I think I did a pretty good job. I mean, it was so much better than when I inked Carmine, and I got to say, it was just as hard or harder, and I developed this affinity towards Mike. I'm not sure people saw it and thought, well, this guy can't be too bad. He can ink Mike Sekowsky, who everybody, unbeknownst to me, everybody loved Mike Sekowsky except me, and everybody was deathly afraid of inking him because he was really hard to ink. I got all these calls from people saying, man, I love your inking over Mike, and it's like, great. And Mark Evanier called me and asked me if I wanted to work on the DNA Agents with him and Will Mineo. I think actually just before that, I got a job through DC inking Captain Carrot. As much as I thought it was cool because I love Scott's work, it's insanely detailed. You know, he's kind of the George Perez, Art Adams of funny animals. I was having fun. When Stan Goldberg did a couple fill-in issues, I was like, oh man, this is heaven. I love this stuff. But then Mark called me and asked me if I wanted to do the DNA Agents. And I remember calling Dick Giordano at DC and asking him his advice because I'd been working at Continuity on and off for about 4 or 5 years. Dick and I were always friends. He was a really, really cool guy. And I told him, I said, look, I don't want anybody to get mad at me, but I'm thinking about dropping Captain Carrot. And he said, well, why? It'll be inking real people. And Dick laughed and said, I can understand that. Yeah, I want to learn more about inking clothes and people's faces and hands and all this, the hard stuff. And I remember Dick, he was just the sweetest guy. He said, look, do it. Take a shot at it. If it's what you want to do, take a chance. He goes, you've always got a place here. I remember him saying that, and I was like really touched. He abided by that the whole time he was managing editor and editor up there. He was just a cool guy. And so I did the DNA Agents. And then basically the rest is history. I actually learned to ink a bit.
In 1987, he inked Kevin McGuire's run on Justice League International.
I get a lot of kudos for working over Kevin McGuire. And I got to say, I worked on him for about a year. And the first 10 issues, I was going by the seat of my pants. I couldn't figure out what to do with this stuff. I never thought it looked any good. And then the last 2 issues, the James Bond takeoff, yes. I thought it finally melded. And then Andy fired me. So it was...
what are you going to do, right?
But
in 1988, he inked a few of Erik Larsen's issues of Doom Patrol.
Erik and I met the same time I met Todd McFarlane at a San Diego con. Yeah. And we all really hit it off. I really liked Erik. He's funny. It's like hanging out with John Cleese. He's got one of the driest sense of humors. He's got this sense of humor that's part Steve Martin, part John Cleese. It's hard to explain. Erik's a funny guy. And we just hit it off. And he and I, Todd, just really, really hit it off at this convention. And, you know, I made the comment to Erik. I said, if you're ever in San Francisco, come on by. You know, I've got a couch you can sleep on. And if you got work to do, you can work in our studio. A couple months later, Erik called and said, I'm moving to San Francisco. Can I work in your studio? And I said, let me talk to the guys. And at the time, it was me and Steve Lealoa, a photographer who was Steve Lealoa's brother, Mark Lealoa. This guy, Brian, who just wanted to hang with us. And 2 commercial artist guys, Pete McDonald. Pete is twin brother to Luke McDonald, who did Iron Man, and Chris Meriden, who did the second WildStar, the second miniseries that was supposed to be a series. Chris and Pete they did very few comics. They were both commercial artists.
In 1989, co-plotted and inked Keith Giffen's 5 year later Legion material.
So yeah, I was a big fan. And when I got called by Keith to work on the Legion, it was pretty cool. It was something I hadn't kept up with because I didn't much like the interim period that much. I was working with Keith on the Justice League, and then I slipped over into the Legion. I think originally Keith asked me if I wanted to help him finish up his run with Paul Levitz. I loved inking Keith. Probably out of everybody I've ever inked, there's probably like 3 guys that I felt like that I actually melded with, because I'm my own worst critic. I look at stuff and it's like, what did I do that for? Oh God, look at this. Was I sleeping? Was I drunk? Inking Keith for all those years, I really enjoyed it. Keith would run with it. In the first issue that we worked on with Paul, he drew this sort of rusted background, and I sort of made it look more rusted. Keith called me and said, I love this. And then from then on, here, you ink all the rust. A few less lines he has to draw. And he just, if he liked it, he liked it. That was cool. So so definitely Keith, the Justice League was so popular that they asked Keith if, what else did he want to do? Because he obviously suddenly had the gift. He told Paul that, I want to do the Legion. And Paul kind of reluctantly, swallowed and said, oh, God, really? But I think Paul figured he owed him one. He said, okay, you got it. Keith called me and said, so we're doing the Legion. Are you on? And I said, sure. And at this point, I think it was just Keith and I. We started talking for about 6 months or so about how we would update the book. It was really Keith's baby. But then after a short time, then he got a hold of Tom and Mary Bierbaum because they were in the whole fandom. Tom's an actual writer. I don't know if you guys know this, but I mean, he actually writes for Variety. And one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. They're a really sweet couple. When we finally got into the book, the four of us I would call Keith. Keith would call me. I would call Tom. Tom would call Keith. Sometimes we had conference calls, but that was pretty rare. But it was just a round robin, and we were always coming up with crazy stuff. I think after about a year and a half of coming up with crazy stuff, I think Keith got a little annoyed with me because I was coming up with way too much stuff. Keith was doing what Keith does a lot, which is like, which is kind of this sort of Wolverine character that he plays in real life. And I had a really cool story idea I wanted, and Keith said, I really like that. We really got to get around to that. In the meantime, you're coming up with too much stuff, because I created with Celeste, and I created Kent Shakespeare. Keith and I created Ivy.
The April 1993 cover dated Arena Magazine number 8 featured an interview with Al Gordon and Jerry Ordway. Where did WildStar come from? The concept is really years old. Part of the idea for the character goes all the way back to grammar school for me, but the name was kind of an accident. I was co-plotting Legion at the time, and I kept getting two of the characters' names mixed up when I was talking to Keith Giffen. There was a guy called Wildfire and a guy called Star-Lord, and I kept saying, well, WildStar, and he would go, who? Oh, I mean Wildfire. So the name was an accident. Keith kept saying, that's kind of a cool name. You should do something with that. And I thought, actually, this fits this concept I've had for years. While putting together the trade paperback edition of WildStar Sky Zero, Al Gordon had another interview, this time for Inside Image issue 18, cover dated August 1994, where he talked about all the special features and new material that was going to go into the trade paperback, how he and Jerry Ordway were fans of the Criterion Collection, were trying to do that kind of special feature for a comic book. He mentions that WildStar was actually one of the million characters I came up with when I was a little kid, the Protector, and this guy just kept metamorphosizing through my life. Then one day a couple of years ago, I was taking a nap and had this really spooky nightmare. I woke up and wrote it down, and a lot of the WildStar story actually came out of that nightmare. I got another character and an even spookier story out of that same dream too. So with a little tweaking and nudging, I took the Protector character and changed him around completely, and he became WildStar.
Things were getting weird at DC at the time. We were getting a lot of interference from the Superman group, and a lot of those guys were friends of mine. I mean, Jerry Ordway and Mike Carlin were both really close friends of mine, and there was somebody on board over there who didn't like what we were doing with the Legion and was constantly throwing, a spanner in the works, as they say. Mike was a pretty cool guy about it, and Jerry and I were really good friends. Obviously, after we left, we did WildStar together. What was really odd was we would, talk everything over with whoever was the editor at the time. It was Dan Rasper, it was Mark Wade, Casey, and we would, go through everything. Keith was really the editor on the book because it was really given to him by Paul Levitz, and basically, here, sail with this. And so everybody just steered clear of Keith and let him do whatever he wanted. And what we were doing was coming up with stuff, and then Keith would sort of spit it out as a Keith story after he swallowed everything that we gave him. And we would pitch it, even before the first issues were being worked on, going over a lot of it with Mike Carlin and Jerry. Basically, they were on board, especially Mike Carlin. But there was another guy on the team, you guys, I'm sure you can figure it out, had a real problem with us. And when we would pitch stuff to Mike and Jerry and just say, this is what we're going to do, are you cool with it? And they would say, yeah. And it was told to this other guy. We would send them the script, and this other guy read the script, in theory. And then when the book came out, he had problems with it. It's like, you already saw this as a black and white comic. You read the script before it was even a black and white comic. And so he was constantly just trying to mess with us. That's why Keith eventually left the book. Yeah, it was a sad situation because we were having so much fun. So it was all just like a weird hippie commune, And then basically because I was coming up with so much stuff, Keith said, why don't you do 4 issues and leave me alone? I wrote issues 21 through 24.
In 1981, he wrote The Quiet Darkness from Legion of Superheroes number 21 through 24, which wrapped up Giffen's run and also blew up the moon, which ultimately led to the destruction of Earth and basically ruined Legion of Superheroes in my book. Not a big fan of that arc or that direction of the book.
The Quiet Darkness. I'd actually, just before that period, pitched a story to Archie Goodwin, and he said, I'll do this one. And I was all excited, and I said, okay, now we got to get a writer and a penciler. And I remember Archie looking at me going, well, we'll get a penciler, but what do you mean we'll get a writer? At that point, I was still under the delusion that writing was this magical thing, that it wasn't just hard work, and being creative is one of the hardest things I do, whether it's musical or writing or inking or whatever. Being creative is, let's put it this way, sometimes I would love to dig a hole. I would would love to work for the city of San Francisco and have somebody give me a shovel and point to like a backyard and say, dig me a 6 foot by 6 foot hole back there and I'll see you after lunch. So much easier than being creative, especially when you don't feel like being creative. I still, to this day, don't know if he was, messing with me or not. I'll be honest, I want you to write it, man. I mean, I grew up with you doing all those insanely awesome, creepy and eerie stories for Warren. He just kind of looked at me and said, why would I want to write it? You already wrote it. And I remember being sort of like slapped in the face by, a dead fish going, what are you talking about? And I realized at that point, probably not at that point, but within the next few hours, I think I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is a job. I have to learn how to do this. And so, but I didn't get going on it. Archie eventually passed away and I ended up working on the Legion. And then Keith basically did the same thing to me. He said, why don't you write issues 21 through 24? And so that was my first solo gig. And it was funny too, because I thought it was going to be like the way we'd been working on it, which was like call up Keith. I'd say, this is my idea. Keith would, and I would talk about it for an hour and then he would draw it and I would ink it and Tom and Mary would do the dialogue. Keith wasn't having it. I said, this will be easy. And he said, no, it won't be. You have to write me a complete full script. I had no idea how to do that. So DC sent me some examples and I didn't even have a typewriter or a computer at the time. Yeah. And so I wrote the whole thing out in yellow, legal pads. It was actually pretty awesome. I mean, I learned a lot. Keith followed my script amazingly. In fact, years later, I was talking to Bob Fleming. I don't know if you guys know who Bob Fleming is. And Rob and I were drinking at a convention. The irony was Bob Fleming and I were drinking. I think Eric Stevenson was there, maybe Erik Larsen. I think we were in an airport bar waiting for a plane out of San Diego or something, or maybe Chicago. Bob was asking me about writing with Keith because he'd done so much work with Keith. I mean, besides, Ambush Bug and stuff like that. I said, man, I told him the whole story. I said, I thought I was going to call him up and talk to him about it. And then he'd just draw it and I'd ink it. And while I was inking it, I'd write the dialogue and it would be just groovy. And then Keith told me, no, you're going to write me a full script. And I said, I was totally amazed that he followed my script. And he went, I'm sorry, what? I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you're telling me that he followed your script? Yeah, like note for note, panel for panel. He made me write every panel. He made me describe every friggin' panel like I was writing a movie script. Yeah. And he was like, fuck you. What did I do? He said, I've worked with Keith for years, and he's never followed one of my scripts ever. I'm sure in Keith's mind, he was sort of the father confessor of the group. And so he was going to teach me how to write a comic book. He wasn't going to make it easy on me. So, I owe him a lot for that. And he laughed and he said, you got a lot of good mail. He goes, mostly moms. But it was very cool. And then when the numbers came in, it did pretty well. And so Patty Bastien at DC said, what else do you want to write? And I was like, really? Okay. And so I came up with the Timberwolf stuff. And Keith said, I love it. Let's do it. I did half of an annual. And then me and Joe Phillips did the 5-issue miniseries.
He was Chris Sprous's inker of choice on Legion, Legionnaires, and later on Alan Moore's Supreme.
I would say Chris Sprouse on virtually everything I inked over Chris. I loved working with Chris. He's real talented and real anal. I mean, he draws each page 3 times. His process is to draw on 8.5 by 11, get a few pages, 10 pages done, take it down to the Xerox machine, blow them up to 11 by 17 and trace them off on the back of a piece of 2-ply Bristol, then turn that 2-ply Bristol over, put it on a light box and draw it on the other side.
Jeez.
So I don't know if he still works that way. We haven't talked in a while, but yeah, he's just incredibly anal. But that's one of the reasons why his stuff is so Chris. It's pretty awesome. But yeah, I liked working with Chris a lot. I really enjoyed inking him. Tom Strong was fun, but I really we did a book called The New Men with Image that Erik Stevenson wrote. I loved inking that book. That's some of my favorite inks over Chris.
The April 1993 cover dated Arena Magazine number 8. Gordon mentions that before there was anything called Image, I was talking to Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and definitely Erik Larsen about this a year and a half ago, and they were really jazzed by the idea of self-publishing, but at the time, it wasn't financially feasible for me. I'd been working on titles like Justice League and Legion that did okay, but the royalties were nothing like Spider-Man or the X titles, so I was kind of keeping my distance. Erik kept trying to get me involved, and I finally succumbed. Anyway, the guy who really made the jump, of course, was Rob. He made a deal with Malibu to publish the first issue of Youngblood, and when that started looking really good, and it seemed as if there weren't that many obstacles to get through, a deal was cut with the remaining Marvelous 7. I think that when you first get into comics, that you have a dream to do your own stuff at some point. I came out of the Timberwolf project for DC Comics, in which I had pretty much created everybody. I reinvented Timberwolf, and Joe Phillips and I designed all the costumes together, but basically we started from scratch. Everything in the series is new. You begin to realize, hey, I just did all this work, I set up an entire universe, and I did it for a page rate. You start to feel kind of funny about it when you realize you've done all this great work and you don't own it. Al Gordon talked with Hank Cannells in an interview from the January 1993 cover dated Malibu Sun number 21. Jerry and I have been good buddies for close to a decade now. We have very similar senses of humor, and we'll probably end up abusing each other. He's on the East Coast, but we still talk, usually about once a month, and we catch up on what's going on in our life. The topic always comes up about what project we'd like to do or are doing. I was talking to Jerry Ordway one night, and I had mentioned that I had some ideas that I'd been thinking about for a while that I wanted to get started. WildStar is a book that I think is a real superhero type concept that if I were still prepubescent, I'd go nuts about it. Not that I'm postpubescent now, but I was really excited, and Jerry picked up on that. He asked what it was about, and I said, forget it, Jerry. If I tell you, you'll use it in Superman. But he really wanted to know, so I said page 1 and told him. So I ran the ideas by Jerry. He liked them and wanted to think about it. He called me back the next day and said, I want to do WildStar. And I never in my wildest aspirations thought that I could work with Jerry as a penciler. He's been drawing his own stories, and I just never thought it would happen. And the synergy is just incredible. I don't want to give away too much. It's basically a very bizarre science fiction type war, but also very Vietnam-esque. In Vietnam, the Americans were supplying the South Vietnamese with weapons, and the communists were supplying the North Vietnamese. Every time one side got ahead in the weapons race, the other side would up the weapons and technology ante. So this kind of thing is happening on a global scale, and two aliens are supplying the technology. But the weapons aren't like the ones we know. They are these symbiotic beings that actually live on the soldiers and give the host certain powers. WildStar has the one good symbiote. Well, actually, they aren't good and bad symbiotes, but they tend to bring out the worst in you. And the symbiote that the good character has is actually called the WildStar. The story is based on the fact that WildStar is stuck in a time loop. He's been coming back countless times, and he doesn't know it. The way the loop has always worked is that he's always come back alone. This time the villains come back with him, and that's the notch in the loop that changes everything else. Keith Giffen and I talked about doing this, perhaps for DC. Keith got involved with some other projects though, but I had originally passed it by him, and he said, this is great. And that's quite a compliment coming from somebody like Keith.
And then Jerry and I did WildStar shortly after that, and life has never been the same.
WildStar Sky Zero was released on March 30th, 1993 with a foil embossed cover.
I will tell you right now, I remember this. The black and white with the red star on it.
Yeah.
I saw
It's striking.
I saw the shit out of this. I remember this.
It came out the month they didn't have any Superman books. That was the month that made me a little bit nervous because I remember going through the advanced comics and like, wait, there isn't any Superman stuff this month? And then I came across Supergirl, Lex Luthor special number 1, so I knew they had that still had their toe in there. I felt like Superman was going to be okay. What do you guys think about the costume?
I think it looks good.
I like the big star on them. That's about it.
A little plain though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. With Image, if it was not plain, it would just have fucking pouches on it.
I was going to say,
So I give it a fucking check mark.
Or you need a flowing cape that's wrapping around everything.
No spikes, no shoulder pads, no bandoliers of bullets.
They saved that for the villains because the villains all look like
no
Image guys.
energy oozing out of some orifice on their body. For some reason, I'm thinking of
Just throw two words together, and that was probably one of them.
yeah, no.
You're talking about Power Blade.
Storm Shadow. Or was it the fuck's? They're in space. Storm Watch.
Oh yeah, sure.
Storm Watch. I had to put those two words together.
You're talking about Fire Blade.
A lot of those had like these giant creatures that had like energy always oozing out of them, or they had some orifice where they have like this energy effect coming out of them,
or their
hair was actually on fire or some kind of weird shit.
That was it.
Yeah, for all that, it's
you're talking about plasma gun, plasma shot.
Some kind of weird shit. So for just to have a giant red star, not really imagey.
The issue I had with the WildStar costume is it looked good from one angle, and then as soon as you catch it from a different angle, it looks fucked up and weird and bland. It was also weird because he had white pants and it was a skin-tight outfit, and they just put too much anatomical detail into him sometimes. There's one shot in particular where he's kind of like going like this at the camera where he's thrusting his pelvis, and they like went to the trouble of actually like doing the entire nutsack, like the full outline, the whole thing, not even like at an angle or something. It's like bam, right there, right in your face.
Gross. Do you have it to kind of look at it?
Oh yeah.
I mean, not that I want to, but
well, it'll be on the Tumblr. or like
not for long,
right?
Zuckerberg.
I think that Ordway was working some stuff out where like he would do angles that he couldn't get away with the DC. Like there's one time where he's throwing a punch and his ass is twisting in such a way that it's very provocative.
When Image first launched, I knew most of the guys that had started Image because some of them I knew Rob Liefeld when he was a teenager. I knew Erik Larsen when he first got into comics, and I was excited by the idea of Image. I know a lot of people even within comics, there were a lot of people who were negative about it, but I always felt like the companies held all the cards. The companies were in control. Anybody who did a creator-owned project in the 70s, Marvel was doing Epic, and there were other smaller publishers in the US like Eclipse Comics and then Pacific Comics that were doing, and First Comics were doing kind of creator-owned things, but they didn't have the sales capacity or the potential as much. To me, it felt like Marvel and DC kind of had a stranglehold on the industry. So when Image came about, I was excited for these guys, but I also felt like they were smart in that they took characters that they were known for and they didn't change them too much to make them their own. So Todd McFarlane had made his name on Spider-Man, and Spawn was not quite Spider-Man. He was a little bit like Doctor Strange and Batman combined or whatever. But the other guys all kind of did stuff that their core audience audience would definitely buy. They didn't try to be experimental. So I liked that. Al Gordon and I had known each other for years. Al had said, we could do one for them. And I was like, that would be kind of fun, because I had thought maybe I could do my Proton character, or, I had characters from my childhood. And the idea of collaborating seemed more fun. You got somebody to bounce ideas off of, it's not just you working all by yourself and hoping for the best. So Al and I started talking, and unfortunately, or fortunately, or unfortunately, the death of Superman that I was involved in was happening around that same time. So I had a lot of different things that I had to do. I was committed to DC to do Shazam. I was working on a full color relaunch of original Captain Marvel's origin. I had been working on that as a side project while I was writing Superman. So I knew something had to give. And I felt like WildStar, we had to do that while it's hot at the moment. In fairness, I talked to the DC people and I said, look, I'm going to do this image thing. And I think it'll probably help in the long run because I'm still going to do Shazam. But by the time I do Shazam, my profile will be much higher and it'll probably sell better because I'll be more known. And I didn't realize at the time that the death of Superman would actually do that on its own, that it would be a huge, huge hit. But Al and I started working. We designed characters. We talked. I mean, Al is a guy who wants to talk all the time. And sometimes you can't get any work done if you're talking to somebody 4 hours a day. We chatted back and forth. We would do sketches. And I think, as I recall, we had faxes back then, which if anybody is young, they won't really know. But a fax machine was basically a way to send a picture through your phone line. So I had a fax machine and I would draw sketches of these various characters. We had like 7 or 8 core characters working on designs of what their powers are going to be, how they work in the book. And we would send them back and forth. And Al would say, hey, how about this? Or here's a name for a character or whatever. And that's how we worked out the story. We worked it out between the two of us. We hammered it out. We both loved Terminator. We loved the idea of the soldier comes back to try to correct some aspect of time. So that's where it started. It starts out with old beat up WildStar. The younger version of him winds up continuing this loop. I started drawing it and he inked it and he did the scripting on it. So it was a true collaboration.
Oh, I did a couple things over Jerry Ordway before we worked on WildStar. I helped him on a Superman issue. I helped him on an All-Star or something, or maybe I inked the whole issue of All-Star. And then we did 2 issues of the Fantastic Four. And I think Jerry, again, like a few other guys that I mentioned, is probably one of the greatest inkers who ever lived. I mean, Jerry is really amazing. He's a good writer. He's an amazing penciler, and he's one of the greatest inkers who's ever lived. And I got to tell you, Jerry asked me to ink him once. When he got interviewed, he was saying how much he liked my inks, and I called him up. I said, fuck you. Stop saying this shit. Don't lie. And he was like, no, I liked it. I'm like, what do you mean you liked it? You never told me you liked it. I assumed you hated it. He goes, yeah, you assume everybody hates everything. Oh, yeah, you're probably right. Jerry is so damn gifted. Inking him is incredibly intimidating. I mean, you look at an issue of anything inked by Jerry and you're going, I got to ink this guy now? This is crazy.
Yeah.
You got 2 guys, Jerry, who can fix things. I think John Burns scribbles until it looks right to him. So when you get the artwork, you're inking it, you have to decide which of the lines, like I said, kind of with Carmine, but it's different though, because the stuff looks really linear. I think Terry Austin is also one of the greatest inkers who ever lived. I mean, I got to know Erik I got to know Terry when I was working at Continuity, and Terry is just one of the nicest guys, again, in the world, and really amazingly talented, and can't get work in comics. He should be working regularly. At least if he's not working, Marvel should pay for his room and board and food for the rest of his life, because he made the X-Men look amazing. Yeah. But Terry was, when I was studying to ink, and I was trying to figure out how to ink that job that got me back into comics, that was the guy I was looking at mostly.
With WildStar, I knew all the guys who had started up Image. I was friends with Rob Liefeld. I knew Todd McFarlane. I was friends with Erik Larsen, Mark Silvestri. I didn't know Jim Lee. That was such a positive for creators. They were the first guys to take their comic book audience, have that audience follow them to their own creation. But it was fun, and it was technically the first Image book outside of the core owners of, I guess it was 7 guys, the first to get greenlit. I don't know if we were the first one to come out in that, but we actually came out, our first 2 issues were solicited by Malibu Comics, and then Image took over and published themselves after that point. But it was fun. It was gratifying. It was really cool to be part of that, but it was weird to have that happen at the same time the death of Superman did, because both projects projects, and both things had the potential to make us like the Beatles. They were successful beyond anybody's wildest imagination. You just could never have said this is going to be this successful. And that happened twice within that same time frame.
That same month, this was like the month that all the fucking Image peripheral books came out, but because of production delays, they came out the same month as 1963, The Max, Savage Dragon versus Savage Megaton Man, Splitting Image, Stormwatch #1. It was also the same month as Shadowhawk #4, Spawn #9, Supreme #2, and Wildcats #4.
I read some of WildStar. I think I read it back in the day, at least the first maybe 2 or 3 issues, but
It was only 4 issues total.
okay. I don't think I ever finished it. I distinctly remember the starfish on his chest.
Right. And that tendency to rip the starfish off of other people and take whole faces with it and
yeah,
shit. Yeah.
That was it. But I remember it wasn't. But I was also buying like every fucking Image book that came out at the time too. So.
Yeah. So the point being though is where you kept up with some of the books, that was one where you were just missable.
I'm sure it's somewhere in my collection still, somewhere just in there.
Well, you tossed through the issue #2. What did you think about the artwork?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's like Max says, it's serviceable.
Do you feel like it's a good fit for the Image style? Does it feel like an Image
but Image
book?
never had a style. They had so many different styles. You could, they didn't, it wasn't like the Marvel style or the DC style. You had McFarlane going one way, you had Larsen the other way, you had Lee going a different way, you had Liefeld going a different way. They all had their own style, so I guess you could equate it to like jazz, like all these different styles playing together and creating art.
Mosaic.
Yeah, so I mean.
So let me try putting it a different way then.
He definitely feels more old school.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Does he feel like he's a part of that generation?
No, absolutely.
Cool dad?
Yeah. No, cool uncle. Not even cool dad. Just who can keep up with the kids with some of the stuff.
There's a lot of detailing in there.
It doesn't have that wow or pizzazz. Like, fuck, even Shaman's Tears was, something different.
I feel like, and Shaman's Tears definitely did not look contemporary when it came out, but it did have more pizzazz. It did, and he took full advantage of that, like the 2-page splashes.
Honestly, I thought
and
that
the
was
near nudity and stuff.
When I'm looking at it, I got a distinct feeling of DC. Like, this is a DC style.
Flashy DC, but definitely DC.
Yeah, DC, yeah. Because, I mean, if you watch, I mean, even like you said, the Max, completely different style.
Yeah.
Shaman's Tears are completely different. Fuck, even some of their other stuff.
Well, it's like, the thing is, too, is Mike Groh was a legit fan favorite art. I mean, he was a guy who people bought specifically for his artwork. He had the #1 selling DC book at one point in time. So he's a guy who definitely felt like he could have inspired the Image artist style. And he's a guy who was doing the kind of stuff that the Image guys would emulate as they were coming up. Where Ordway was much more traditional, much more story oriented, not really splash page oriented, lots of panels. And so he felt like more of a classic conventional comic book artist, where Grell was doing the portfolio type stuff that the Image guys were doing. So he felt like more of a piece with him in that respect.
But I think also those other guys.
But I do think it's Jerry Ordway's style, his techniques, the dashes and stuff, are more like what Image guys were doing.
But a lot of the guys in the Image at the time were experimenting with their art and pushing the ideas of what they wanted, because the big 2 companies wouldn't let them do that. That was the whole thing about Image, is you could push the boundaries of your art type idea. That I mean, look at Larsen's stuff; it's like out there sometimes, and McFarlane's goes way out there sometimes. This felt very like if I picked up a book in the '90s from DC, I was picking up a Superman book just to kind of keep the numerical order. I hate to say a journeyman or a fill-in guy, but that's what it kind of feels like. Nah, that's just me. I'm a Marvel guy, so
yeah. I think that one of the things I respect about him is he made choices based on what he actually wanted to do. The guy had been in commercial art. He'd done licensing art. He made a lot more money doing that than he was going to make in comic books. But he was willing to get into comic books because that's what he wanted to do. That was his love. Likewise, he had opportunities to draw some pretty big books that he passed on because he didn't think he would enjoy it, or he didn't want the pressure that would have come with it. I think he did the things that he wanted to do, and I thought what he did well. But it does feel like he could have been a bigger name if he had picked up a few more of those high-profile books in a time period when he would have been more of a cutting-edge artist. And this was an instance. This is, I think, one of the only instances of an element of opportunism where it's like, look, this is going to be a big thing. I want to be a part of this big thing. But it was too late, I think. If he'd done it a little bit sooner, he could have done it more with that. Well, again, this book came out when Malibu was still putting out their stuff. This was going to be like the first non-founder book, but there were, again, production delays. So this was right there at the forefront of all the Image stuff. So you knew he was all over Wizard Magazine. You knew he was heavily promoted. It was a top 10 book of the first issue. It did not hurt for visibility.
This is Jerry Ordway. Yep. I confirm. Are you trying to tell me this is Jerry Ordway? I confirmed. This is definitely. Where does Superman show up?
What about the coloring and stuff?
I actually think the coloring looks really good.
Yeah.
I mean, this looks. I think this looks really good. It's just not an Image book for whatever. What year was this?
This was 93.
Oh no. The Image audiences would want no part of this.
You think so?
They don't want any part of that.
The story was Born Under a Bad Sign. For some reason, the miniseries was subtitled Sky Zero. So you're like, okay, that's the name of the story, right? But then they also had the title Born Under a Bad Sign. So I don't even know. Pick one. The book was dedicated to all those who came before. Other people who worked on the book were because they felt like they had their pick of whoever they wanted to for this book. John Workman was the letterer. Reuben Rood was the colorist. And the book was edited by Bill Buds Shakespeare. I tried to read the letters columns on this book. He also did letters column for Trencher. If you thought Trencher's dialogue was bad, this motherfucker wrote fucking unreadable letters columns. I hated it because what he tried to do is he tried to write in a Shakespearean fashion while also doing some kind of poochy 90s dude bro bullshit at the same time. It's a combination. It was like a fucking icicle through my brain every time I tried to read the shit.
Replies in the letters column?
Yeah.
Oh, weird.
Oh, it's horrible. Horrible.
That's going too deep in the bit.
No, way too deep. And I think he'd also done some stuff on Legion. I think he might have been working on that.
The story starts out with our old pal WildStar. Make sure I don't say Firestar at some point. It's a weird name.
I just noticed they spell WildStar wrong all the way through comics.org here. Son of a bitch. He's got a capital S, man. It's two capitals in one word. It's with everybody. Hotwire, Skylark, Jumpstart. I noticed it on buildings. All the guys that were doing graffiti, they were tagging stuff. They were stealing stuff from Rick Griffin, who did the Fillmore posters back in the mid-'60s. And he did a lot of stuff like that. He'd write Jimi Hendrix with a capital H and a capital X. I thought it looked cool. And I was seeing it on the as graffiti. And so I decided to use it in the future.
WildStar, he's getting attacked by like a gang of superpowered dudes as he's searching for something. Something very peculiar I noticed. In the first 2 pages, there are like sex jokes, which is what's really strange and kind of threw me off because it's like Jerry Ordway to me is a very conservative like Superman artist. So I don't associate these kind of jokes.
I recently, in the last 4 years, I've probably tweeted more politics than I ever had because I just couldn't be quiet any longer. I just had a hard time. I went into this thinking I don't want to be political, but I just have been so horrified that, I just couldn't be quiet. I thought, there's a point where if I'm going to lose a couple people, I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm just trying to show you examples and, hopefully you will learn from some of these.
We're both kind of screaming progressives from the Bay Area. I mean, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're pretty politically active progressives. I had a couple of guys get mad at me because I said I was a progressive. They said they didn't want to get into that. And I said, well, I wasn't getting into it. I was just telling you who I am.
One of the females in this band of miscreants attacking WildStar says, "You're getting slow. Must have been a wild night, WildStar. You look like someone I just had my way with." And I was like, what the fuck? And then at the bottom of the page, there's some chick, I think her name's like Livewire or Hardwire or something. And she's got her torts hanging out. She's like, "Sure, Michael, I got loads of time. You look really great down there. I've always liked men on their knees." And it's just like, what the fuck am I reading? Like, I don't know. It was just a really strange way to start this thing. Anyway, page 3 or page 4, he then rips a guy's face off. And when he rips the dude's face off, it turns into like a scaly big millipede and it scurries off and the dude shoots it with a blast and he immediately becomes extremely weak because he has like a limited amount of projectile firing. So that's when you kind of get the vibe that the word symbiote is dropped a few times. This is obviously some world dominated by symbiotes. WildStar's got a symbiote on him. All these dudes are powered by symbiotes and there's all sorts of weird symbiote action going on and lots of weird bulges being drawn on WildStar's suit just over and over again, accentuating the bulges. One guy's name is Trans, which is really strange. And I had to like triple take reading Trans. I don't even remember what his fucking power is from this shit. I don't know if he's a transmission repair person. I don't get it. But Trans was very it's a striking name.
It's like the gay ghost. It's like this thing does not mean the same thing as what we remember these things meaning, or we don't remember that these things used to mean something different, I should say.
Yeah. So then page 7, this Hardwire and or Livewire chick, can't remember her name. She's like, somebody says something about motherly. She's like, "Motherly? Why, you little, I ought to spank you. Except I usually save that for my quote unquote close friends." And I'm like, what am I reading? It's bizarre.
What got me is like the girl character, the Jumpstart. Well, for starters, she's called Jumpstart and she's a horny chick. She has a clitoral hood that comes out of her pants and goes up to her navel. And that's part of her costume. And it's also like the symbiote that gives her powers, but it's clearly a clitoral hood with the clit at the navel. And like and then she also, Power Girl has a boob window.
Yeah, I need a visual.
This chick has like boob bay windows. It's like there's almost nothing but boob and just a little bit of cloth to kind of cover it at the edges. There was something weird going on with these costumes.
You do know those over Image books.
Way more gynecological than Image, big gigantic rubber. Well, later Larsen, certainly.
I was going to say, wasn't one of Larsen's villains called the clitoral hood? I don't even know how that works. I mean, just Google it.
Google it.
What was her name? Jumpstart? All Google. Let me turn my VPN on.
You're right. I think they just threw 2 words for everything now.
Jumpstart clitoral hood.
The team is Dead Star, not Dreadstar, Dead Star, Hotwire, Mazer, Trans, which means a lot different thing now than it did back then. Trans was a teleporter. Fucking Frozone or some shit.
No, now you're thinking Incredibles. You're getting your Disney, Pixar, and your Image mixed up. But I'm sure they had something like
my God.
What?
That's a clitoral hood.
It's right on the fucking cover. Look at that.
No, that's 100% what that is.
Let me see.
That's, yeah.
I will agree. That looks like a vagina. I just looked at it right now. I'm like, how was that on the stands and not pulled off the hands?
I mean, look at that. It's just peeking out the top there.
Yeah, that's
incredible, folks.
That's very daring artwork.
Yeah, I need to try to see if I can find it, but apparently Ordway did a birthday card for Al Gordon that featured her in her birthday suit.
Al Gore?
He invented the Skynet.
And that's how we got the PMRC, ladies and gentlemen.
So when we do the merch drop, we'll have the clitoral hood t-shirt.
No, the clitoral hood hoodie.
A little clit on top.
I used to have a Resident Evil liquor shirt that was just the tongue. If you just like reversed it, it could be her costume.
I'm saying we add that to the merch drop right there. Clitoral hoodie. We'll call it, what was her name again? Slingshot or?
Jumpstart.
There you go. There's the one right there.
Oh, yeah.
Bam. Put it on a tumbler.
Can't believe they got away with that.
Yep.
He's fighting all these people. They're looking for some device that's a time machine. Randomly, as the fight's getting like very, very intense, this invisible, translucent woman appears named Skylark, and she kind of freaks them all out. There's a talk of something called the Kioans. So you're like, okay, well, that has something to do with something, but we don't know yet. And then he activates the time machine and vanishes. From there, we cut to modern day. So before it was saying tomorrow, and now it says today. So dude and his son are talking. He's on the phone with a guy. There's like an explosion. They're all rushed out of this place to head to the side of the explosion to figure out what happened. They get there and the building's like completely destroyed. And who's there? It's WildStar and these dudes that he had been in the process of fighting. When they're getting out of the jet, they're talking about whether or not it's like a Russian enemies or if it could be a bomb or whatever. It's like a whole thing. And this guy says, I never believe anything I read. And then this guy replies to him and says, must make public restrooms kind of a challenge. And I got a snicker out of me. But I was just like, what the fuck? Yeah, for like these like weird, there's just really, and we'll touch on it later. So they're talking about how like the blast had occurred 30 years ago. There's obviously weird time travel shit going on. WildStar's there. All these people from today are now interacting with the people from tomorrow. WildStar grabs one of the dudes who had been trying to fight him, but he was trapped under like a steel girder. And he starts pulling this guy's torso off. And as he pulls the torso off, it's another symbiote. It's like these symbiotes meld onto these people, but they just look exactly like them. And it's weird because when he rips the symbiote off of them or off like their back, like their skin and shit is exposed. Like it's pretty gruesome. And then he always has to blast them with his projectile, which then saps all of his energy. And he's like, oh, and he passes out.
There's a couple of things that I'm really proud of in WildStar. I mean, I got to work with Jerry and I got to tell Jerry what to draw, which was a weird egotistical thing. And like Keith, he was really cool. In fact, I got another compliment from Jerry. I think he'll admit to this. I had described this panel and I get this, it was in issue number 2. It's early on, like on page 2 of issue 2. I get this call from Jerry and he's like, I like this panel. I said, oh, good. What do you like about it? He said, well, I've never drawn this panel before in my life. And I was like, what are you talking about? You never done this panel? He goes, the way you described it is not what I write. It's not what I draw. What I had done is there was this big monster on the ground, this big, mutant thing. And WildStar is about to hit him. And the panel is him winding up. And I described it as the Bugs Bunny cartoon when Bugs is a pitcher and he's on the mound. He leans back and he starts winding up and he's about to hit this guy. And then the next panel is the guy getting knocked, out of the park, but there's no point of contact. And Jerry was like, I'd never thought to do an action sequence of 2 panels without having the moment of contact. Or you told me to draw him winding up and then the guy going flying away. And I was like, isn't that like, it's a Monty Python bit. It was just funny. Jerry was like, I would never have thought to draw that. That was very cool. Thanks for that. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Issue 2 starts out, it's completely silent for the first few pages where WildStar is fighting some gigantic monster. And then he wakes up and he's like, oh my God. He's in a car with this guy named Mickey, who is the son of one of these main scientists who kind of got thrown in this whole thing. You got to read it to understand this, folks. Lots of fucking characters. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty details. And he's like, oh, I was having this crazy dream. I need you to take me to, there's like a rock somewhere where he can kind of set him there. And he goes, yeah, I know where that rock is. And he's like, leave me there and give me a few hours to like go to sleep and chill and regain my power. Nobody's going to find me up here.
He's having that dream dream. He's reliving him dying in the previous loops.
Right.
And when he's in the car, there's two fucking pages where there's nothing but exposition. And the reason that was because I'd written this story, and when I was done with issue 2 and halfway through writing done with issue 1 and halfway through issue 2, I realized I had made a bunch of time blunders, just weird inconsistencies. So I had to rewrite sections of it, and I had to have WildStar explain it to somebody. And so there's what you're never supposed to do in comics. What Keith used to always say: don't say it, draw it. Don't say it, show it. But instead, of course, I have 2 full pages of exposition that I did my absolute best to make clever and entertaining, and nothing happens. It's just blah, 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 blah. It's a little Zen, he goes to the rock and he goes and sits on top of it, and, his costume, it's not a costume, it's a membrane. He's starting to wilt and molt, and he's losing it. He goes up to regain his strength. My favorite characters as a kid, some of my favorite characters, are always superheroes who their powers are a problem. I loved Havoc in the first issue he's in with Neil Adams.
Right.
And then there's Dynamo, who we used to call Dynamo in the Thunder Agents, who if he wore his belt too long, he became so heavy he couldn't reach and turn off the belt. And then there's Space Ghost. If you capture Space Ghost and separate his arms, he's totally impotent. He has to reach across and hit the button on his manacle to shoot his manacle powers. And then there's Jonah, who has all of Superboy's powers, but he can only use one at a time. So if he's underneath a building holding it up, he's not invulnerable.
Another thing I noticed at this point, they use words like damn and bastard a lot, right? So, and I think ass is dropped once, but so these are like borderline curse words.
Very PG-13, yeah. It's like, it's American, we can get away with all the violence and some innuendo, but we're not going to throw out full-on F-bombs and shit.
Right, but then he's like, so here's a conversation between Michael WildStar and this guy, Mickey. He's like, for the sake of argument, let's just say I buy all this time travel horse patooties, okay, then why are you here? And I'm just like, the dude just said, he called another guy a bastard a page ago, and now this guy's saying horse patooties. Horse patooties. And I'm just like, who? It's like somebody's grandfather wrote this, and they're like trying to be edgy, so they throw bastard in every now and then, but then like every now and then this shit leaks out where they're like, ooh, horse patooties. And the guy who's saying it is supposed to be a kid, like in his late teens or early 20s.
Yeah, the wrong guy is cursing, right. Or either that, or the kid's like jamming, Christian rock on the way up to the mountain or whatever.
Really bizarre, strange. And it's not like, it doesn't ruin the story or anything, but it kind of takes you out of it when you're reading this dialogue. And by the way, for an Image book, there's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of dialogue. I was expecting far less words, which I think, we can talk about if it's good or bad or not. But anyway, just something, it was like horse patooties. Like, what the fuck is going on? So you're learning about these Kiowans. They have a friendly relationship with the U.S. since they landed in 1947, is what they say, which I think is that when Roswell happened?
I was one of those freaky UFO kids as a kid. I mean, I was born in 1953, so when I was about 10, we used to go back to where my sister lived. She was 16 years older than I was, and she lived in Colorado. So my folks and me, the three of us, would take off on our 58 Rambler station wagon with push transmission and drive to her house twice a year. And I was Calvin. I loved dinosaurs so much. My whole life was around UFOs and dinosaurs. Obviously, you read WildStar. We saw UFOs in the desert in Nevada when I was a kid. I mean, they were probably weather balloons the Air Force Base was close by where 51 is supposed to be. So they were probably test jets and stuff like that. But we would see things in the sky, no noise, traveling really fast. But we did that every year when I was a kid.
Yeah, so Roswell was 1947. So that's why they pick out 1947. So it says they were looking for something special on Earth. And Earthlings basically, or the U.S., basically gave them carte blanche to go and search for whatever they want, whatever this beacon is they're looking for in exchange for technology, right? So the U.S. gets all this technology. Then there's another race called the Razplar, and they came to Earth looking for something. Their future counterpart had stolen a time machine to send a beacon back to Earth to 1993 to alert their historic armada to Earth's location. They made a deal with U.S.'s biggest competitor to supply them with the same level of technology that we'd received from the Kiowans, and then this competitive escalating technology got out of hand, which I don't know if that's supposed to sort of be fucking Cold War. They're trying to sort of mirror, it seems like Russia is supposed to be our biggest enemy that the Razplar, hyped up. They don't really go into that level of detail. I think you're supposed to fill in some of these details around. And that's when, so WildStar basically explains that the time machine isn't really a time machine. It operates by switching places with other versions of itself placed 30 years apart, like playing leapfrog. And whoever's in operation goes along for the ride. This doesn't make it any clearer. It's still very strange. There's some big government dudes. They come in, they steal all these people's files. They send them to this place called the New Blue Installation that nobody knows where it is. The goons from the very first issue are still traveling around. They're trying to find WildStar and get the time machine to go back to wherever they're supposed to be.
The April 1993 cover dated Arena Magazine number 8. It includes some black and white art from the miniseries, including the original cover to issue number 3, where WildStar meets the Savage Dragon. They had not yet added the handlebar mustache, so Dragon looks kind of old without the mustache. Anyway, there's 3 or 4 WildStars depending on how you look at it. There's an actual human character that the book is about. The symbiote parasite that lives on the character is the WildStar also, and the human counterpart is named after the symbiote, which is actually named after a legend which we're not really sure about. Well, I am, and Jerry knows, but the audience doesn't know if the legend is a part of God or goddess or something else, or maybe it was an omen about this war. So there's actually 3 or 4 WildStars. But the book is about this character and his little pet fish, a tick. That's actually a good way of putting it. They're living off each other, definitely attached. It's the most difficult part, doing all the exposition. But basically, in the war in the future, the bad guys all have these different kinds of symbiotes stuck to them. The bad guys are actually the equivalent of soldiers. What you see as a good guy or bad guy is dependent on which side you're on. If you look at Captain America from the perspective of the Nazis, then he's the bad guy, you know? The play here is depending on where you're standing. If you look at one book from a different perspective, the bad guy could be WildStar. But most of the characters that you see in the WildStar book have these symbiotes, and the way we set it up is sort of like warring factions. Basically, it's 2 corporations, and it doesn't matter who they are. There's been an alien alliance on Earth since 1947. There was this war that was started by another alien race that has come to Earth after the first aliens had made this friendly alliance with the US and had been there for a while. There were certain offers made to certain corporations, and, skipping all the details, it escalated into a war. It's not a national situation, it's the corporations. The bad guys had all the symbiotes, and the good guys had captured this one symbiote. And you know, the symbiotes live off of your emotions and feed off the stuff that your body produces when it's in a bad way. The symbiote sets you up to be kind of a jerk. And sometimes the individual isn't aware of how much influence the symbiote has. It's like sitting in a bar and thinking, boy, she's looking better every beer. The WildStars are pretty heavy hallucinogenic, so once it's connected to you and it's influencing your chemical responses, it can increase certain hormonal responses and make you feel pissed off or whatever. The angrier you get, the more say the symbiote becomes. So it's a vicious cycle. The more pissed off you get, it gives you more power, and the most powerful symbiote is probably WildStar. It's like a drug. I'm certain anyone would get a thrill out of having the kind of power that WildStar wields, and so you might find yourself getting angry just so you can enjoy the power rush. Of course, at the same time, there's the drawback of losing your humanity, and the symbiote feeds off of you so that you have to rest. When the story begins, WildStar probably hasn't even napped for about 2 weeks, so we're talking about a very tired and angry soldier. There's a lot of details here. The short version is that in the far future, humanity has an alliance with peaceful aliens that turn us into basically the Federation of Planets, but these other aliens want resources of some kind from the planet Earth, and since they can't seem to bust through the human-alien alliance to get to that stuff in their own time period, they're going to use time travel to go back to the 90s, where mankind is more prone to division, and take advantage of that to fuck with us and take our shit. They also pointed out it seemed like everybody at Image was introducing time travel concepts and space aliens, and how they would basically, at that rate, have as many alien races as Marvel or DC after a couple of years. Didn't really work out that way, of course. There's some talk about featuring characters from within the Image universe. At one point, it wasn't in this interview, it was elsewhere, Todd McFarlane was insisting on them using Spawn in WildStar because he wanted to see how Jerry Ordway would draw Spawn. Didn't happen until they actually did a Spawn trading card series. Ordway did a card with Spawn and another one with Sam Twitch and Overkill. And then, of course, Erik Larsen Savage Dragon appeared, and in the ongoing series, Mighty Man would appear. Al Gordon continues, I hadn't mentioned this to Jerry, but Keith and I have been talking about crossing WildStar over into the Trencher book. And there's a character that I created that has actually crossed over into some other stories that I have written that ends up in this story. She's definitely going to be part of the Trencher series. Keith and I are going to have to get together and discuss how this will come about. Probably some sort of special annual crossover with the Trencher book. And there was some talk back and forth about the conditions under which another miniseries or an ongoing series would come about. There's a trading card that reproduces the cover to the issue of Arena Magazine. Features the information on the back: real name unrevealed, age 52, height 6'4", weight 300 pounds. First appearance WildStar number 1, March 1993. Last appearance WildStar number 3, May 1993. WildStar is 5 things. 1. It's the name given to a legendary celestial event that appears in the night sky above Earth every 1,000 years, the latest being 1996 AD. 2. It's the name given to a legendary future entity who, at time of astronomical crisis during a cataclysmic war, will turn the tide of battle. 3. It's the name given to a genetically altered alien symbiote weapon, which offers its host amazing powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men at a price. 4. It's the name given to the host of said symbiote weapon. 5. It's the name of Image Comics' newest blockbuster blockbuster comic. WildStar is copyright 1993, Al Gordon and Jerry Ordway.
Lots of stuff going on. Issue 3, Savage Dragon shows up and he's got a fucking handlebar mustache. I don't know why he's got a handlebar mustache. Did he have a handlebar mustache in when did this book come out? September of 1993?
Yeah, I have to check to see where we're at in the podcast because there's so much shit that's been deferred for so goddamn long. And again, our schedule fell off a cliff. This girl that he was sleeping with had gotten shot by a stalker. He had sort of a bit of a spiral. And for the early issues of his ongoing series, which is going to launch at some point after WildStar, he'll have the handlebar mustache.
Okay, very strange. I thought this was a fun coloring error or something, or somebody
it's
misinterpreted.
Not a good look for sure.
No, especially because he's hairless.
Right. Well, I mean, he's quite hairy in general.
Right, he has body hair.
He's got a body hair, but the fin plus the Fu Manchu is not working for this artwork, you know? I think it worked a little better when Larsen did it, but it still just doesn't work very well. Like, you need to at least go for a beard or something.
Yeah, well, and it's not like it's not a full mustache, so it does just look like a shadow gone awry because it follows like the cheekbone contour, or you know what I mean, the smile lines on the guy's face. It's weird. Anyway, WildStar crashes through Savage Dragon's cop car. They explain he's out in the middle of fucking nowhere where all these people are because he had been transporting some super prisoner who got extradited to Sacramento, and then he was on his way back to, where is it, Savage Dragon operate? Chicago or some shit. He's on his way back, and they just happen to be where WildStar is. He crashes into the squad car, and he's like, Dragon! And he's like, I don't know who you are, but obviously WildStar knows who Savage Dragon is. They kind of fight for a few pages after that, and then Savage Dragon basically fucks off, like he's gone. A bunch of military guys show up. They do the same stuff. Like, they do all this, so here's a line from one of these dudes. I should have your wise-ass mouth stapled shut, so you'd have to suck food through your nose. Remind me to have you peeling spuds when this is all over. And it's just like, you call him a wise-ass, and you're going to staple his mouth shut. And then you follow it up with a fucking peeling spuds trope, which I thought was like a Warner Brothers cartoon where they're peeling spuds in the fucking body. Like,
it's Jack Kirby doing Steve Rogers in the 40s, basically. Where you gold brick.
Yeah, and they drop a gold brick in here too. In fact, at the top of this page, move it, you gold bricks. And then he tells us to shut his wise ass mouth up before he staples it shut. I'm just like, such a bizarre collection of terminology in this book. Pretty sure there's some more inappropriate sexual comments made from this hardwire, live wire chick. Mickey gets blown up in an explosion, so WildStar peels his own symbiote off his body and puts it on Mickey's body because he reveals to him that Mickey is WildStar, but in the past. And WildStar, which they had kind of, I mean, if you hadn't picked up on this shit, by the end of issue 1, you're not paying attention. But the WildStar that we've come to know in this book kills himself in issue 3 to save Mickey, the young kid who's now going to become WildStar. You with me here, folks? I know it's a little strange.
I mean, one of my favorite lines that I wrote is in WildStar when the future Mickey, Michael, gives Mickey a chance to break the loop. He says, do me a favor, don't be me. And I just like that because it's so ridiculously simple.
And that's kind of how issue 3 ends. Issue 4, the final episode. Here's another thing they do, folks. This shouldn't bother me as much as it is, but if you read this shit, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. They don't use the word shit, okay? They use the word spit. So people are always saying he's going to knock the spit out of you. Or someone says, which would make a little sense because you can punch someone and knock the spit out, right? But then somebody will say, holy spit. And that's when you realize, oh, spit is supposed to be shit. Dude, by issue 4, they have used the term holy spit or you piece of spit. I think there's a piece of spit one time. It is used so much. We're talking like sometimes a couple times in a page by different characters. It's not like one character who says frag all the time. It's like multiple characters are using spit instead of shit. And it is so cheeseball, and you're like, fucking come up with a different word. You know, like nobody thinks you're edgy because you put holy spit and got away with it, right? Like there's not a fucking comma code authority on this book anyway. So either write shit or come up with something else to say. Or just put the fucking asterisk, pound sign, exclamation point. You know what I mean? Just blurt it out. Like it's just so bizarre. And it's so, again, it just is another layer to the dialogue in this book that is just really bothersome. What's left of these like weird marauder guys. Oh, so anyway, this hardwire, live wire chick has now flipped sides because she's kind of had a thing for WildStar this whole time. They don't really get into it, but they've obviously got a thing. So she's helping Mickey now that Mickey's WildStar, and they're still being chased by these marauder dudes, right? So one of these marauder guys, whose name escapes me, and it doesn't matter, at one point gets a hold of live wire, hardwire chick and says, just the way I like my women, all drippy and semi-conscious. what the fuck,
It's kind of disturbing, yeah.
This was followed up, this like precursed by a holy spit. And it's like, oh, okay, so you bleeped out the word shit, but the dude saying that the way he likes his women is all drippy and semi-conscious. That let's leave in the book. That's fine, right? Very weird. So yeah, there's all this weird G. Willikers stuff, and then like really off-putting statements that are way worse than any single curse word. And then later on, like there's another chick and somebody grabs her foot and she's like, hey, leave my foot alone, pervert. It's like, what? I think she like stepped on a guy and I think he grabbed her foot and she calls him a pervert. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? It's so weird. Skylark, the invisible chick, translucent chick from the first episode, shows back up when shit's all going crazy. She's there with a bunch of WildStars that are all also semi-translucent, and Mickey sees one of the WildStars and it's the WildStar that sacrificed himself, and all like the main raider guy who was talking about the chick being all drippy and semi-conscious, he puts it together. He's like, oh, we got to kill the youngest WildStar and that'll get rid of all the WildStars. So he's like, kill this fucking guy. So they all start going after him. When they do that, Skylark teleports all the good guys out of the building they were in, teleports the bad guys to like the fucking Arctic shelf. They're on like a glacier. And then the general guy who'd been hanging around there teleports the general dude to like Russia for whatever reason. And then this weird omnipotent voice comes down and says, Skylark, you've proven yourself irresponsible. You need time to meditate. And then takes her powers away. So now she's not fucking translucent anymore. So she explains that she's the step between man and God. And she says that she came back to Earth in the 90s because she likes the 90s. It's her favorite time period. And while she was there, she knows there were all these sick people. So she was like, I'll just cure the sick. And they're like, what do you mean cure this? She's like, I just cured all of them. She was like, I was tired of seeing sick people, so I cured them all. And the rippling effect of her appearing caused the Rasplar to notice the ripple and hone in on her location. So that's why they came to Earth. And when they got to Earth, anyway, it's this whole like, because she showed up and cured people of illnesses. That's what set off all these chain of events. And this time machine never worked. She was the one making them move time. And the time machine's actually bullshit. It's just like what?
If it was possible that Timberwolf was going to continue in some capacity, why did you bring Gemini as Skylark into WildStar?
Well, I would never do that. That would be a breach of contract.
I see.
Well, because I love the character. I mean, she's basically a ditzy goddess. Skylark, Aria, everything is just cool with her. In fact, there's an illusion in WildStar where she basically says that she cured death for 24 hours. That there was a day on Earth in the past where no one died for 24 hours. And she realized everything got fucked up. Mm-hmm. So that's where she's coming from. She's basically a weird cross between remember I grew up in the Bay Area. She's a cross between like the first generation of hippies in like the early or the mid 60s, like 65, 66, and a cheerleader. Skylark is Candy Clark.
Oh, and hold on. I gotta find where this Damn, I thought I put a page number for this line. And I've been putting page numbers because there's so much fucking dialogue in here. Here's where she healed everybody. And this other thing too. And this is kind of a thing for all comic books and all movies in general. You'll have these people who just like refuse to believe what's happening in the book because it's so weird is happening. Except that person themselves is a fucking superhuman with wild powers and they can fly through the fucking air. So at this point, WildStar has had a symbiote. He watched a dude peel a symbiote off his body and stick it to his body, and he's fought all manner of monsters and he totally bought into the time travel theory. But now that the Skylark chick shows up and says that it wasn't time travel, that she's this like link between God and she's the one moving people around, now he's like, oh, I gotta be dreaming. This is all too weird. And it's like, that's too weird? That's too weird. You're shooting fucking laser bolts out of your body right now, and you're covered in this weird symbiote bug. But this stuff's so weird. So then he just keeps saying stuff like, no, I'm dreaming. And usually you would do it a couple, like, okay, obviously this guy's like, he thinks he's kind of freaking out and he's dreaming. Except this goes on for like 2 pages where he keeps going, why am I talking to you? I'm obviously dreaming. And then they're having this whole conversation. He's like, nope, I'm dreaming. I don't even know I'm talking to you. I'm dreaming. Gotta be dreaming. And it just keeps going on and on. And it's like, Art, we get it, dude. We get, you think it's a dream. And then he's like, man, I wish I would have just dreamed a zipper onto this costume so I could, just unzip this costume and get out of this dream. And then he's like, he goes, look, he's like, what am I saying? So this the Skylark chick says, don't you think you're being sort of cranky? And he goes, look, I'm not talking to you. And he's like, what am I saying? You're not even here. I'm alone, asleep, nice and peaceful. Someplace. You're just a figment of my imagination. I shouldn't have had that large pepperoni pizza. He mentions eating a large pepperoni pizza at Zachary's that he shouldn't have had. Dude, this happens over like 3 or 4 pages where he just keeps talking about, I'm in a dream. Well, I don't even know I'm talking to you. I'm in a dream. Watch. I'm in a dream. So he picks up his dad and he flies off. And I can do that because I'm in my dream. When I'm in my dream, I can fly, right? And it's like, dude, okay, we get it. You think you're in a dream. It's just so like, oh gosh, dude. I don't know.
It's a weird thing too, because it was a trope. I've seen that in other places too, where it's like I had bad pizza and had a dream. It's like that's not a thing I have any familiarity with. I have too much pizza and I have heartburn, but I've never connected dreams with pizza, and it's a thing that I've seen in the movies, I've seen it in comics. Like, why? Who made that connection? Why was that a connection, and why did they keep beating that drum for the longest time? I feel like somebody who must have had something like sprinkled on that pizza that wasn't oregano had a weird dream that one time, and everybody was just referencing that over and over again. I don't understand that.
Yeah, and so yeah, here it is. He goes, "This is what I get for chowing down on a large Zachary's pizza before I go to bed." And then the next panel, he's talking about how he's dreaming, and he should have dreamed a zipper on. And then the next panel, he's saying, "I'm not even here. I don't know why I'm talking to you. You're just a figment of a large pepperoni pizza." And then the next page where he talks about, "Come on, Dad," and he grabs me, and he starts flying, and he was just like, "I'm just flying because it's my dream. I can fly whenever I want." And he goes, "Of course, in a second, I'm in algebra class back in high school, and I forgot my clothes." It's like, dude, we get it. This is the third page. It's like they took every weird dream excuse and put it in every fucking panel for the last 3 pages of this comic book. It is so weird. And then the last page is of like where the book started, which is really weird because they're like, that's like 30 years in the future. Like, it's just really strange. I think they're trying to show you that this kid grows up to be the WildStar we started the book out with.
And nothing has actually been altered except that we've introduced WildStar into the world. But otherwise, it's a big circle, and anything else is futile because his history is written in stone.
Yeah, it's just very, except they kind of had mentioned earlier on that was not how this works. So that's why I was like, oh, whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyway, sorry, that was kind of a rambling recap of this, but there's just I'm having a hard time just determining what I should have mentioned and not mentioned. But I think you have to just said, folks. Weird shit goes down. WildStar is a weird Venom symbiote time travel character, except it's not time travel. This woman who is like the step between man and God was just fucking around on vacation and caused all this chaotic shit to happen. So bizarre. Really. Including, she even got this like nerd guy who is like a hacker to write code in this fake time machine so that anybody discovered it, they would think it was a time machine because the code was so complex, but it's all fake. What? And that's a whole thing I forgot to mention. This guy who's like sneaking around all these military bases who helped write this fake time travel code for a person who's basically a demigod who fucked up. And then you also have to remember the person who, the omnipotent voice that tells her that she's in trouble and you need time to meditate. That was probably God, but they don't ever mention that again. And it's bizarre.
So just to run the numbers, WildStar Sky Zero #1 was January 1993's #5 title per Diamond, as reported by Wizard Magazine #19. It was released on March 30th, 1993. Issue #2 arrived on May 11th, 1993. So 2 months later, it was the 10th highest selling comic book of that month. #3 came out on October 1st, 1993. So very much in tune with what you would expect from Image Comics in that time period. It was the 14th best-selling title of that month. And then the final issue arrived October 15th, 1993. So that's only 2 weeks later. So it's not necessarily Al Gordon, Jerry Ordway problem. It's quite probably a printer problem. If you've only got a 2 week gap, that was 26th place. So still, the entire miniseries were well within the top 50 of comic books being released. So it was successful. There was a good print runs on that thing. I got good penetration, and I think not making a WildStar sexual innuendo joke there. You had a pretty critical evaluation of Jerry Ordway's artwork when we previously discussed this book. Did actually reading the book alter your opinion at all?
No, you know what? And honestly, I call Jerry Ordway, like, if you're for sports fans out there, right? They have MLB has a stat called like above replacement. They take like a average replacement player, and then you can either perform better than a replacement player or worse than a replacement player, right? To show how many wins you contribute to the team above just your average 500 baseball player, right? That you call up from the fucking minors, right? So that's, to me, that's Jerry Ordway. Like, Jerry Ordway is like the guy who would illustrate a fucking encyclopedia of, Marvel Universe handbook. He's the guy who could do that. Because you're never going to like mistake who he's drawing, but it's never going to be anything like, it's not flashy, right? There's nothing wrong with Jerry Ordway. He's just, so I tell you, Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Steve Epting.
Just go through the entire list of people who worked on Superman comics in the 90s and early 2000s.
Well, I think
they would all be fitting.
Bogdanov's a little better. Mm-hmm. That's a different tier.
I love that you are one of the few people like me who's like, yeah, but that John Bogdanov, there's very few people I think that would actually rank John Bogdanov over Jerry Ordway.
But I think he's a little flashier, and I think Steve Epting's another one of these dudes who worked on the 90s Avengers books. To me, Steve Epting is like one tick above your Ordways and your Dan Jurgens. I'm not saying that they're ready to blow up Image. They're not Image artists. And I put Mark Bagley right above these guys, but not far. Like, you know, those dudes who just draw like regular assed comic book characters. Right?
I love it. Ironically, though, both Epting and Ordway technically are Image artists, but I know what you mean when you say that. There's guys who drew books that had an Image logo, and then they were Image artists, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
No.
These guys
totally
got shit canned in the second year of Image.
Exactly. That's what I mean by this is an Image podcast. An Image artist is that new 90s wave of people who sort of broke the mold and was like this next generation of shit that we saw. Next generation, 3 generations ago, who fucking knows? Whereas, these are guys who I think were like direct lineage from like the 70s, 80s, right? Where it seemed like Jim Lee like came out of fucking nowhere. I mean, other than Neil Adams, there was no pre-Jim Lee. Rob Liefeld. Who the fuck looked like Rob Liefeld before Rob Liefeld? Erik Larsen. He was this weird like Uber Kirby kind of guy, right? Like these dudes were Todd McFarlane.
The specific synthesis of more varied influences created that new art style. It's like if you look at Jack Kirby and then you look at Barry Smith or Jim Steranko, you can see, okay, well, this begat that. You had, and of course you had the Marvel style and the DC style, and what they used to call like Frigidaire, or what they used to call like, again, the Marvel style, which is basically John Buscema, where if you were drawing, you know, how many heads high and proper anatomy and certain perspectives, doing it by the rules, essentially. And it wasn't really until getting into the 80s when people started to break the rules and you had enough rule breakers that you had enough diversity in terms of what a comic book could look like that you could then synthesize that into an entirely new art style, the flashy Image Chromium Age style. You know, you had to have a Michael Golden and an Art Adams and a Neil Adams and a John Byrne and all these other people who were different enough from one another that you could have a synthesis of styles that look nothing like the official baseline from the Silver and Bronze Ages, for instance.
Right. Well, and I'd even put Bob Layton, who's one of my favorite artists, I'd put him on like this Jerry Ordway level. The problem is that he picked his layouts, so he would have like Mark Bright do the layouts, and he's inking Mark Bright. And suddenly, to me, now that takes him up a notch, or Jackson Geiss. And to me, now we're up in level. Or when he's inking John Romita Jr., he's a different level. So he was more of a finisher than a full-on pencil inks guy. But whenever he does his own pencils and inks, I think he's more of that classic Silver Age, Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens style superhero artist, only with much shinier metallics. So I'm not saying it as an insult, because I just said one of my favorite artists is on that level too. I'm just saying that when you open up a WildStar Image book, it's not really what you're expecting. But so many of these 4th tier spin-off Image books got such shit studio artists who are pretending to be someone pretending to be Rob Liefeld. So you're not even getting pure Liefeld, you're getting Liefeld's studio artist's apprentice. That I was actually pleasantly surprised with the art in these books. Like the storytelling was like, I could tell what the fuck was going on, right? So it was, you know, I'm not want to give Ordway too much credit, but kind of in a way surprised. This is nothing, and this is groundbreaking, but I just know this could have been a lot worse. If this was like a WildStar Strike File or some shit, it could have been really, really bad. So no, the art was like the way down on my list of gripes. It's nothing.
It is interesting too, is like you mentioned Jurgens earlier, and I think about a character that was similarly designed, Bloodwind, who appeared in Justice League comics and Superman titles of the time. And this is a guy who has an all-white costume, and Jurgens takes this as an opportunity to essentially draw a silhouette with no major details or very light details. It's supposed to be a face and a silhouette. And this character is black and white with the face obscured by a mask, so it'd been super easy to just make this guy nothing but that. And instead, he goes out of his way to add details both to the black areas and the white areas. Sometimes details that are probably not necessary, but he doesn't skimp on those details when he easily could have.
Right, like this guy's cock. I see this guy's whole unit like multiple times in this book. It's just lots of package detail, lots of hatching on the guy's package. It's incredible. And it's incredible, especially because the black part of his costume can kind of be a void sometimes. So you're really just staring at this dude's dick. At least I was.
It's kind of like, if you've been on Twitter lately, they keep promoting this image of an upside down dog that they've like created this funnel for, and like the one dog's supposed to fart in the other dog's face, but because the dog is upside down on a couch, the dick is just right there. And it's not that I want to look at this little dog's dick, it's just it's right fucking there. How do you avoid the shit?
Page 7 of issue 4. I mean, he throws like a sidekick package. He turns and punches the guy, huge ass crack. Then he gets thrown into another dude, huge package. I mean, it's just like every single, like, extremely accentuated. I swear to God, his taint's got hatching on it. It's incredible.
He is definitely, he may not be the most extreme, may not be the most radical, but he's definitely the Gucciest of all the Image heroes.
He's the Gooch with the most. It's ridiculous. It's on page 21 of issue 3. For the love of God, if you don't check our Tumblr, folks, Diablo Frank, can you just get the bottom right panel from issue 3, page 21? And in fact, I'm gonna take a picture and fucking text it to you right now so you can see this shit. This shit's fucking incredible. See, I don't know how
I definitely I have a collection of perineum shots of WildStar that has been sitting in a folder since it feels like it's been the 1993 folder. It's probably like 2021 or so when I first started trying to get this shit together. So it's a good chance I've got that already set aside, but feel free to send it to me, just double check to make sure I've covered all the ground.
Yeah, have your phone close by. It's on the way. If the fucking FBI doesn't flag it for some reason. I will say the colors are fantastic in this book. I was really, especially in issue 1, and the paper quality, at least in these issues, get better after issue 1. Issue 1's more of like a regular paper stock, that sort of matte finish, and then 2, 3, and 4 are all glossy.
I did in fact have that particular coin purse shot set aside. It's not so much a dick root as like a kangaroo pouch.
Oh yeah, like yes, yeah. He's wearing that like new underwear everybody likes, where you have the pouch where you tuck your balls, and it's really accentuating the pouch. I'm trying to see who did the colors in this book. Ruben Rude and Oleoptics coloring. Good for you, Ruben Rude. Like, this is a really nicely colored book. I dig it. Art, to me, I would say for Image, I give it a B, maybe C+, whereas I would expect like a solid D or an F for this book. So a C+ was like, okay, like this is better than average to me. This is a passing grade. C+ passing grade. Don't take that as a negative. The dialogue, lots of dialogue that I'm not so sure was necessary. Plot was a little overly convoluted, very Terminator 2-esque.
Yeah, the Terminator wrought such just damage across the entirety of the Image line in these early days, because it seemed like all these Image books started out with, well, first we were in the future, and they're going to go back to the past to change it. Prophet,
I think
Wildcats, just tons of it. It was just a thing with all these books in this time period. The derivation.
They even make the joke, like, let me guess, the world's computers have become sentient and destroyed. Like, they even make like a joke about it, except that, yeah, you may be making a joke about it, but it actually, until you find out that there's no time machine and it's this weird like intermediary god that's making all the time. But that happens in only the last like 3 pages of the whole 4-issue series. So for the rest of it, it's all Terminator. You know, there's a young guy involved. They're trying to keep alive. You know, it's very Terminator-esque. So, and this was the era of Terminator. Like, this is when fucking Terminator was in theaters still, right? When did Terminator 2 come out?
The previous year, 92.
92, right? I guarantee you that.
Or no, maybe it was 91. No, I think it was 91. Sorry, my bad.
Okay, well then it was on. It was at VHS at this point. You don't get any credit for coming up with a time. You know what I mean? Like, I was trying to give him some credit. Like, you know, this is kind of creative. And then I'm like, dude, no, this shit is all fucking symbiotes, because everybody loves symbiotes in the 90s, and like bad Terminator time travel. And it's just like, oh, no, I can't give you too much credit. So between like the annoying dialogue and how much of it there was, but, and here's the but, the story at least is recognizable. Like, shit just isn't appearing out of nowhere. Like, there's an actual like chain of events that takes place. Whereas, man, some of this Image stuff we've read before, it's like, where did these people come from? Like, they're just like people on a page. You know where the fuck they came from. I don't like, was this the guy from earlier? Because they're drawn so poorly, you don't even know it's the same character. This was actually like a rational-ish story that had like a beginning, middle, and end with the characters, and you at least knew where the characters were at any given point in time. I gave this 4-issue series a solid C, which I have to say is still better than what I thought it was going to be. If that's so, I'm not saying this is like the greatest thing ever, but when you told me I had to read fucking WildStar, I'm like, good Lord, I'll be done with these in like 10 minutes. And it took longer than that. There was dialogue to read. I would say, you know, these were fucking cover price $2.50 to $2 each. I mean, at least you got the words out of it. It took time to read. Where, you know, some of these Image books that were fucking like $3 an issue, you'd be flipping through those things, you know, and there's no words on them. So I think you at least got some time eaten up from this stuff.
You know, it's funny too about comics. I was in a comic store in Arizona. The guy in the comic store, I won't tell you how he finds out because it's kind of silly, but he found out that I was me. And he was like, dude, you mean you're the Al Gordon that wrote WildStar? And I said, yeah. And he said, that is my favorite comic. And he spent the next 20 minutes explaining my comic book to me. I don't mean that as a bad thing at all. Yeah. He had figured out so much stuff that was so cool, that was subtle.
It was fun to do that. And it's something that fans still refer to it. They still ask me about it. People still ask me to sign copies of it, which is kind of fun.
So the spawning ground for this episode, 20th Century Geek Podcast, Adriano, Alex Chung, CH, Canoes, Charlton Hero, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Del Dracula, Doc Strange, Ed Moore, Edward Huey, Fanholes Podcast, The Hammer Strikes, Random Geeky Stuff, History of Comics on Film, Hulkling, I Was Joe Is, Jason Snicked Venable, Jeffrey Brown They Them, Jocktastico, King Size Comics, Giant Size Fun Podcast, Christados, Longbox Crusade, Lukashin Sergey, Marvel Universe Online Project, Mike It Send Aliens to Me, Nuka Carl Quantum, Siskoid, Sue Kent Ant, Talk Nerdy to Me, Tim Price the Podcrasher, Trekker Talk, Two True Freaks You Should Be Listening, Under the Influence, Wayne Burrows, and Wonder Woman Warrior for Peace Podcast.
Damien, what? That you know in the bedroom, there's thousands of boxes of comics.
Thousands of boxes of comics. I'll have you know, I've only got 47 boxes of comics.
47?
47, that's barely any. That 47 is less than one box of comics for every year I've been alive.
Do you think that it's dangerous? We've got so many boxes piled up by the bed.
I think it's highly unlikely they would fall, though. I've stacked them quite well.
What would you think if I told you that maybe you should get rid of some?
What?
It's only a suggestion.
How dare you? I love those comics.
Do you love all of those comics?
I love almost all of those comics.
But should you love these comics?
I love them all. I will not part with any of them. How very dare you?
Prove it.
Well, I suppose we could start working our way through my collection, reading them together and deciding whether or not I should love this comic.
Sounds like a podcast.
Well, we are two middle-aged men. We probably should start a podcast at some point.
You're right, everybody else has got a podcast.
So listen to Should I Love This Comic with me, Damien Drew-Whiter,
and me, Erik Drew-Whiter,
where we will go through comics and tell you,
should I love this comic?
Go to shouldIlovethis.blogspot.com, where you can find all our latest episodes. You can also see a gallery of images that we talk about in the episode. Should I love this comic? I think so. What do you think?
Do you remember your first comic book? Do you remember the first time you held a cover in your hand and you flipped the pages? You read the adventures of these amazing heroes and you really fell in love with the medium? The first time you bonded a character to a team, to a company, and you knew, yep, I'm in this for life. Well, so do we. So join us on the never-ending reading pile from the Pulp to Pixel podcast network, where we proudly don our nostalgia goggles. We dive into our favorite comics, our favorite eras, our favorite characters, our favorite creators, and we just bask in the glory that is being a comic book collector. Come join us and help us chip away at the never-ending reading pile.
Imagine a podcast that celebrates the things we love. Why spend time being so angry and cynical about our fandoms? Join me, the irredeemable Shag, for a show where we're just trying to be happy. The Once Upon a Geek podcast. Our discussions focus on a variety of geeky subjects that we're passionate about. While the topics will be ever-changing, our focus will be on science fiction, comic books, what it means to be a geek in this world, and other nostalgia-fueled ideas. Life is short. Focus on the positive. Find your joy. The Once Upon a Geek podcast, part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
This is a fan-produced, not-for-profit podcast. No copyright infringement is intended, and any use of copyrighted materials believed to be covered under fair use. If you don't agree, you can go straight to hell!
And I wanted to remind you, we're probably going to do a few more spawns, so if we spend all of our time talking about these other movies, you're going to die, and I'm not going to get anything else from you. And I'm not even ready for this episode to come out yet. The idea is to do either the Conan or the Spawn for this week.
All right.
So we're going to be real brief, if at all possible, for these next ones. But you still got your book open, right?
Yeah. Let me go to the next one. Or am I thinking wrong? Hold on, let me go grab the book. 1 second. It should be in my room.